500 years ago, driven by their own ambitions and insurmountable egoism, people unleashed a devastating war that claimed countless lives and left deep wounds on the earth. The Silver Dragon, whose majestic strength and wisdom had protected the lands from harm for centuries, watched the bloodshed with sadness and pain, and, filled with regret, decided to intervene in human affairs to stop this madness. As a result of the dragon's intervention and the realization of the need for unity, the disparate lands that had survived the horrors of war were united into the great empire of Clermon, which became a symbol of hope and rebirth. And at that very moment, the beautiful maiden with soft pink hair opened her eyes in surprise, as if awakening from a long and deep sleep filled with strange visions. When she looked at her reflection in the mirror, an amazing picture appeared before her. She saw herself from the past, an ordinary girl who did not stand out in any way and lived the most ordinary life. However, as she studied her new face, she suddenly realized that she had become the heroine of a romantic story, and not just a simple beauty, but a terminally ill duchess she had once read about. The main characters of this unusual and touching novel were two twin sisters, Reich and Rinzel, whose destinies, intertwined by blood ties, were filled with both happiness and tragedy. The daughters of a noble and wealthy aristocrat, they enjoyed luxury and the love of those around them from childhood, receiving everything they could wish for, except for the most important thing, good health. Reich, whose frailty was noticeable from an early age, spent much of her time bedridden, in a state where the line between life and death became frighteningly thin. And then one day, despite her poor health and excruciating suffering, she, having gathered incredible determination, decided to go to meet the main character, although she was barely 20 years old. However, fate turned out to be merciless. Soon the young maiden died, leaving behind a sad image. Her thin hand lay limply on the bed, like the last stroke of a tragic painting. Reading these lines, the main character could not hold back bitter tears. She sobbed loudly, covered with a warm blanket, feeling her heart squeeze with pain for the fate of the character. And so, opening her eyes, the girl realized that she suddenly found herself the younger sister of that very noblewoman who suffered from a fatal disease, and whom she had tried with all her heart to help, even in her past dreams. Now she appeared in all her beauty. An elegant long dress of a soft blue shade flowed softly over her figure, and her name was Rinzel Valencia, a name full of aristocratic grandeur and sophistication. All around was a stately house, surrounded by a dense forest, filled with the whisper of the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a loud voice was heard calling her, addressing her sister with a gentle note. The hurried footsteps echoed on the smooth floor, and the sound of shoes added rhythm to everything that was happening, creating a feeling of liveliness and haste. It was her older sister Reich, who opened the door with a joyful smile, filling the room with light and warmth, and with tenderness in her voice, invited the younger twin to join her. Rinzel was sitting in her soft bed, enjoying the quiet of the cozy morning, when her older sister suddenly, with a loud and joyful voice, announced that she had amazing and incredibly good news that could not wait. After this, Rinzel, with a graceful smile, turned to her sister, asking what exactly she meant, sincerely rejoicing at her unexpected arrival, as if this moment was filled with the warmth and light of family closeness. Reich, with a beaming expression on her face, could not contain her emotions, and began to enthusiastically tell how she had recently been lucky enough to talk to someone who held a special place in her heart, her lover. She happily told how she once saw this magnificent young man with snow-white hair, and, overcoming her embarrassment, decided to approach him to quietly say hello, and he, with a kind smile, responded to her just as cordially. The man looked at her with a warm smile, and then, bowing slightly in apology, explained in a soft voice that, unfortunately, he was forced to hurry since he had urgent matters that could not be postponed. Reich, enchanted by his charming smile and noble appearance, followed him with a look filled with warmth and tenderness as he walked away. She could not take her eyes off him, realizing that this was her first feeling of true love at first sight. Clenching her hands into fists in front of her, the sick but incredibly inspired by this moment girl, with sincere delight, confirmed that she was infinitely happy about this meeting, which she will now keep in her heart as one of the brightest memories. This man, with his grandeur and refinement, turned out to be none other than the first prince of a great empire, whose name, full of royal grandeur, sounded like Ishur Klurman. The emperor's son, with his refined features and noble bearing, inherited his mother's exquisite taste and love of beauty. He loved to dress in luxurious clothes and tirelessly sought knowledge, devoting time to learning and self-development. Thanks to his amazing, almost extraterrestrial appearance, this young aristocrat quickly won the hearts of many, becoming the first and most eligible bachelor in the entire empire, whose image was admired not only by his appearance, but also by his intelligence. The sky above the majestic building of the residence was cloudless blue, as if reflecting the hopes and dreams that were in the air on this beautiful day. Sitting on the bed next to Rinzel, Reich, slightly embarrassed, but still having made up her mind, confessed that her heart now belonged entirely to the prince, and she could not hide her love for such a majestic and charming man. After these words, Reich gently pressed herself against Rinzel, embracing her with warm sincerity, and, almost in a whisper, confessed that with all her heart she dreamed of marrying this delightful man, whom she considered ideal. However, Rinzel, hiding her sadness behind a soft smile, looked down, lost in thought. Her heart sank with sadness as a disturbing thought flashed through her mind. She doubted that her older sister would be able to live a long life next to the emperor's son. But instead of telling the truth and darkening her sister's dreams, Rinzel decided to lie, gently responding with encouraging words that sounded sincere, although they hid her true feelings. Reich, beaming with joy, rushed to hug her little sister again, finding comfort and support in her presence, glad that she was not alone in this world and could always share her experiences. Meanwhile, Rinzel, keeping a calm face, listened with a heavy heart as their father stubbornly tried to arrange the fate of his eldest daughter, insisting on a marriage not with the prince of her dreams, but with another high-ranking suitor, the one who was nicknamed the Demon of War. Hernan was a man who inspired fear and respect in all who knew him. His unique abilities and incredible resilience on the battlefield allowed him to survive the most dangerous situations, leaving his enemies amazed and almost terrified by his skill. Although Hernan's appearance was quite cute and attractive, his stern character and aura of danger made people avoid him, not wanting to get close to someone who could suddenly turn into a thunderstorm on the battlefield and in life. The emperor, realizing how vulnerable the empire was in the face of political instability, decided on a secret marriage that could strengthen his power and prevent possible threats from external and internal enemies. Placing her warm hands on her sister's shoulders, Rinzel said with a soft, reassuring smile that all the rumors circulating throughout the empire were just fiction and should not be paid attention to because they had no basis in reality. When the traveler found herself in Rinzel's body, she initially thought it was just a dream, but suddenly the memories of the original noblewoman from the novel came flooding back to her, and everything around her began to seem much more real. The noblewoman decided that she would make her sister happy, even if it meant sacrificing her own life for the well-being of a loved one, and her determination was so strong that she had no doubt that her choice was correct. The beauty thought, looking at her lips, remembering that there were only 2 years left before the death of her own sister, and this realization only strengthened her desire to change the course of events, not paying attention to her personal fate. After this, Rinzel stood up abruptly and, without holding back her emotions, shouted to her father that she was ready to marry the demon of the empire, despite all the risks and dangers, because she was ready for any consequences for the sake of her goal. A man with black hair and a formal suit sat in an expensively furnished room, surrounded by luxurious furniture that emphasized his high status and belonging to a world where power and wealth played a key role. It was the Duke of Valencia who, with his arms folded across his chest, asked his daughter why she had suddenly made such a decision and was clearly stunned by the unexpected turn of events. Pressing her hand to her cheek, the noblewoman turned away and lied, saying it was love at first sight, hoping that this explanation would convince her father, even if she herself did not believe it to be true. The surprised aristocrat froze in place, not expecting his daughter to give such an answer that did not meet his expectations, and for some time he did not know how to react to such a turn of events. Rinzel decided to imitate her sister's behavior and began to admire the prince's beauty, his masculinity, and other virtues, in an attempt to create the illusion of the sincerity of her feelings. The duke reminded his daughter that he had no intention of marrying her off to the prince, but only to support him as heir to the throne, since this was important to him from the point of view of political gain. Pressing his fingers to his temple, Valencia said that he would think about his daughter's words and try to find some solution that would suit everyone without disrupting his own plans. Rinzel thanked her father, and although she tried to appear calm on the outside, inside she was pleased with her action and the courage she had shown in making such a decision. Left alone in the room, the duke sighed heavily and, without hiding his fatigue, said into the void that his secret companion, who had been eavesdropping on the conversation, had himself heard how his daughter wanted to marry the prince. A prince with black hair appeared from behind the curtain, dressed in dark clothes, his figure barely visible against the shadows, creating an atmosphere of mystery and tension. Hernan was a handsome young man with a cold expression on his face, calm, but at the same time he radiated such confidence that every look from him made you feel like he was able to control the situation. As a war demon, young ladies were afraid to approach him, and so he had no experience at all in dealing with them, as his reputation and dark aura scared away those who might show interest. As a result, he heard every word of the beauty who admired him, not knowing that Hernan himself was aware of all her words about him, and this made him feel a little awkward, although he did not show it. Smiling sheepishly, the handsome man blushed, not expecting her words to be heard, and quietly stated that he was not against changing his bride, because he lacked sincerity and real feelings in what was happening around him. The duke loved his daughters very much, and it was not just a feeling of affection, but a real depth of love that he had for they were his link to the departed duchess, the mother who left an unfilled void in his life. This was because the daughters bore an incredible resemblance to their deceased mother, the duchess, and this resemblance reminded the duke of the time when his family was complete and he felt protected and loved. The man with glasses pressed his hand to his face. His gaze became more focused and serious, and, with a feeling of guilt, he apologized for having to deliver the bad news, realizing how difficult it would be to accept it at such a moment. It was the doctor who confirmed the aristocrat's daughter's dire diagnosis and reported that no medicine existed that could cure their illness, leaving him in despair and without hope. However, at the funeral, Ishar quietly asked his dead lover why she did not tell him that she was terminally ill, because he would have been ready to do everything to save her if he knew the truth. He stood in the rain, near the tombstone, and, holding back the pain in his voice, said that he would find a way to save his beloved, because in the vault of the Imperial Palace, one could find anything if one made enough effort. This vault was in the form of a large door, deep in the stone wall, and inside was what could save Rinzel and Reich from their terrible illness, ancient knowledge and powers that had been kept there for centuries. However, to enter the secret and hidden vault, one had to be a direct descendant of the imperial family that had lived on this land for a long time. Or rather, a descendant of a silver dragon, whose powerful and strong blood possessed ancient power and the right to access forbidden knowledge. Rinzel, on the other hand, by marrying another prince of the empire, would be able to gain access to the vault as his wife, which would open up for her the path to salvation that she so desperately sought. The lady quietly opened the door and entered her chambers, feeling the tension and fatigue disappear, giving way to the calmness necessary for further steps towards her goal. On trembling legs, she could barely approach the table, on the surface of which stood a large mirror, and, despite her fear and confusion, she tried to restrain herself, trying not to show either weakness or despair in her body. The woman's hand came down hard on the tabletop, making a loud slap, and the sound echoed in the empty room, as if emphasizing the hopelessness of the situation and reminding her of how she had lost control of herself. From fatigue and a weakened body, the beauty could barely stand on her feet. But in her mind, she mentally cursed Rinzel for the weak body she received after the soul's transmigration, feeling how all her strength was leaving her with every moment. In the mirror, the girl saw her old self, with black hair and a sweatshirt, the way she was before her soul moved into someone else's body, and she thought with bitterness that all this was more like an endless dream than reality. The noblewoman, with a heavy feeling in her chest, turned away from the mirror, thinking that perhaps if her health continued to deteriorate at this rate, she would die quickly, because this body was far from as strong and healthy as she would like. The lady fell to the floor, throwing herself down in despair, and then, weakened by her mental state, she leaned back on the bed in bitterness, closing her eyes, trying to find peace in this painful moment. She carefully touched her leg with her hand, feeling the painful bruise that remained with her after Rinzel couldn't understand how exactly she got it, not remembering the incident itself. And then, unexpectedly, the lady's sister burst into her chambers, shouting loudly and demanding an explanation of why her relative had decided to marry the demon of war, with anxiety and incomprehension on her face. Without thinking twice, the noblewoman quickly hugged her younger twin, calming her down and trying to express her support at that moment, despite all the problems and disagreements that had arisen between them. The woman's hand slowly began to slide through her hair, running gentle fingers through the strands, while the calming movements seemed to help her find harmony and inner peace in this stormy moment. Rinzel had to ask Reich if she knew that she was not destined to live more than 20 years. And at that moment, a deep silence hung between them, full of bitterness and endless thoughts about the future. Pulling away, the noblewoman tried to explain to her sister that they had too little time for treatment, and that Rinzel was ready to sacrifice herself to get into the Imperial vault and find the necessary medicine. The sister's hand squeezed the bride-to-be's, reminding her that they were both suffering from the disease, and perhaps only a joint effort could help them overcome this ordeal, which made their bond even stronger. Rinzel then raised a finger, reminding her sister that the monster prince was not only the one who ended the war, but also a hero who became a symbol of hope for all who survived that terrible conflict. Pretending to be a fool in love, the beauty began to praise her beloved, the heir to the throne, singing odes to his beauty and valor, with each word reinforcing her image of an idealized admirer. Two beauties stood on the balcony, watching from above as a man on horseback rode below, surrounded by his army, their eyes following his every move, like the embodiment of strength and grandeur. A joyful smile appeared on the noblewoman's lips, reflecting inner pride and satisfaction from what was happening, as if every moment before her was part of a great and fateful picture. Then, Reich could not hide her admiration for the robes of her beloved prince, which fluttered in the wind, creating a majestic image as a symbol of his nobility and dignity. Suddenly, the sister interrupted her relative, telling her not to worry because it was Rinzel's choice, and she had to go her own way, despite all the external circumstances that could change their destinies. After this, the beauty expressed her wish, saying that she would like her twin to marry the man she loved, the one who was dear to her and who could give her happiness despite all the difficulties. Sitting opposite her sister, the aristocrat confessed that her love for her was stronger than for her future husband, and these words concealed a deep affection about which she could not remain silent, despite her obligations. Soon night fell, and darkness fell outside the window, as if cutting them off from the world, plunging them into silence, in which every word became especially important, and feelings became heightened to the limit. They chatted until they lay still, immersed in the silence of the night, lying together in the same bed, the darkness enveloping them, creating a feeling of comfort and safety despite the worries that lurked within. Rinzel slept restlessly, feeling a soft pillow under her head, but her sleep was disturbed by strange sounds that came from somewhere far away, as if someone was whispering her name or uttering words filled with longing. In the silence of the night, one could discern sobs, accompanied by the barely audible words of her sister, who repeated that she so much wanted to live and was afraid of dying young, conveying her sadness and grief. In his memories, a beautiful image of an old mansion surrounded by a luxurious garden with white staircases, high windows, and a fountain, the jets of which sparkled in the light of the night sky, appeared before Rinzel's eyes. In this mansion, footsteps were suddenly heard, which sounded clear and confident, as if someone in white shoes was walking on a perfectly smooth floor, and the person's blue dress was slightly swaying in an invisible wind. Rinzel stood next to the maid, breathing heavily as if she had just walked a long way, although in fact, she had only walked a short distance, feeling how fatigue was already rolling over her, like a weight falling on her shoulders. The lady entered the room cautiously, having received permission to enter, with her hands folded in front of her in a gesture of respect, but her face clearly showed nerves that betrayed her inner anxiety. Inside the room, a man was already waiting for her, dressed in luxurious clothes that emphasized his high status, and the fur cape on his shoulders gave him a majestic and aristocratic appearance. Rinzel, stunned by the sudden visit of the prince himself, confirmed that she was indeed the duke's daughter, but her voice trembled, reflecting excitement and a slight hint of fear at such an unexpected meeting. The guy who introduced himself as Rinzel's fiancé looked strikingly attractive. His short dark hair shone under the light, and his deep dark red eyes seemed to beckon with their mystery, complementing his calm and refined expression. The man walked forward confidently, his steps clear and rhythmic, and his long black cloak fluttered behind him in the strong wind, creating an atmosphere of strength and unyielding determination around him. The subordinate, without a second's delay, appeared at the first call of his master, and the latter, possessing a loud and commanding voice, solemnly announced that he had finally found what he had been looking for so long, and that this was exactly what he needed. The servant was stunned to the depths of his soul, as if lightning had torn the sky right above his head, because it was extremely rare to hear such words from a high-born aristocrat, full of special meaning and significance. Bowing low, the boy expressed his readiness to fulfill any wish of the master, sincerely assuring that he was ready to carry out absolutely any order without hesitation, no matter how difficult it was. Hernan, with unshakable confidence, ordered his subordinate to immediately find and deliver the best robe that could be found in the entire empire, and the man unconditionally agreed to carry out the task. The servant, who had already bowed, froze in absolute amazement when he finally understood the true meaning of his master's words, which contained something more significant than it seemed at first glance. The prince, who was in a difficult situation, was helped by his wonderful brother, whom everyone around sincerely adored, and he advised him to choose a magnificent red cloak, decorated with exquisite fur, looked away thoughtfully, as if evaluating something in his head, and muttered that the robe did indeed look decent, and perhaps even better than he had imagined, especially on his relative. The lady, showing exceptional respect, bowed gracefully before the prince, greeting him with her gesture and not forgetting to add a compliment emphasizing her admiration for his elegant and impeccable clothes. The prince, known as a merciless monster of war, became embarrassed under her gaze, and, feeling his social awkwardness, he lowered his eyes slightly, avoiding direct contact to hide his inner embarrassment. The man's hand nervously clutched the edge of his cloak, his fingers involuntarily fingering the fabric, betraying the tension he was trying to hide, but it was too clearly reflected in his movements. The beauty thought about it, but uncertainly assumed that with these strange gestures, the guy might have been trying to clean his cloak from dust or dirt, although his behavior seemed somewhat unusual to her. Hearing the compliment in his direction, Hernan unexpectedly smiled softly and sweetly. His facial expression became warmer, and he, surprising everyone with his gesture, gallantly invited the lady to sit down next to him, as if inviting her to a friendly conversation. Rinzel stood in amazement as she was struck by the prince's behavior, which was strikingly different from the rumors that described him as a cruel and ruthless man, nicknamed a monster, capable of instilling fear with just his gaze. Sitting across from each other at a cozy table, they began to slowly discuss the details of the upcoming marriage ceremony, exchanging opinions, and sometimes furtively observing each other's reactions, which created an atmosphere of slight tension. Nervously, the woman's hands instinctively clenched into fists, causing the fabric of her dress to wrinkle slightly. But these gestures betrayed her excitement and uncertainty about how to behave at such an important moment. With her cheeks flushed, betraying her embarrassment, the lady thought about how much she would like to see such a sincere and charming smile on the face of the emperor's son once again. Receiving compliments one after another, Hernan turned away each time in embarrassment, while his hand involuntarily reached to his face to hide the blush that treacherously betrayed his awkwardness and shyness. Watching the prince's touching reaction, the noblewoman could not help but laugh, finding his behavior incredibly sweet and sincere, which seemed especially surprising for a man of his status. Suddenly, Hernan, quietly and timidly, asked a question that had long been troubling him. He asked if the lady sitting opposite him was not at all afraid of him, despite all the rumors and stories about his cruelty. Rinzel, having collected her thoughts, firmly and calmly replied that she did not feel the slightest fear in his presence. Her voice sounded confident, as if she was talking about something completely obvious to herself. Hearing her words, the prince suddenly beamed with joy, as if his inner world was filled with light, and his sincere happiness struck Rinzel so much that she was slightly perplexed, not expecting such a reaction. Hernan, his fingers gripping the graceful handle of the cup, hesitated a little, but still asked a question that seemed to be especially important to him. He wanted to know what else his companion thought she found beautiful about him. The prince sat, waiting for an answer, completely focused and watching his interlocutor intently. His iridescent gaze seemed to be trying to read her thoughts, and his hands unconsciously clenched in tense anticipation. The silence was suddenly broken by clear and rhythmic steps on the soft carpet. The sound of men's shoes gave the feeling of something important approaching, as if the air in the room had become a little heavier. At this time, behind the walls of the room, one could hear the lively conversations of nobles who were discussing the latest rumors and gossip with great interest, mixing truth and fiction to add piquancy to their stories. A graceful palm slowly slid along the rows of clothes in the wardrobe, feeling the smooth and soft fabrics on the hangers, as if checking to what extent each item suited the tastes of its owner. The first heir to the throne suddenly asked with interest who exactly had purchased the first of the things he had recently ordered. His voice sounded calm, but there was curiosity and slight tension in it. The lady standing next to him apologetically said that she herself did not know who exactly had bought the outfit for the prince, since another buyer had insisted on keeping this information a strict secret without revealing his name. The handsome man, with a slight smile on his lips, quietly babbled that he had no idea that this would turn out to be a secret, adding a note of feigned surprise to his voice, which only emphasized his ease. After these words, he gently took a thin strand of the lady's hair in his hand, lightly playing with it with his fingers, and began to speak quietly and soulfully, admitting that she had long attracted his attention and seemed incredibly attractive to him. The nobleman, with a slight smile on his lips, leaned closer to the girl, his face almost touching hers, and in a half-joking but charming tone, he confessed that he might like her even more if she revealed this intriguing secret to him. However, when he learned that Hernan himself was behind the purchase, the man's interest in the beauty instantly faded, and he, as if having lost all enthusiasm, coldly turned away, concentrating again on his wardrobe. Ishar, going over his thoughts in his head, winced when he realized that his brother might have already managed to take that very best shirt intended for an important reception, leaving him with nothing. Previously, Hernan had often expressed his dissatisfaction with this thing, which belonged to his brother, saying that it was absolutely terrible, some kind of helpless jacket, completely unsuitable for an aristocrat like his brother. The heir to the throne, pressing his hand to his face in thought, frowned slightly and asked those closest to him what was happening to his brother, trying to understand why he had changed so much and how things really were. Night had fallen, and there was silence under the starry sky, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for what would happen next, while the stars sparkled like ancient lights, igniting a premonition of something significant in the heart. Riek headed to her sister to tell her how her meeting with the prince, who was rumored to be a real monster, went, eagerly waiting to see how her sister would react to everything that happened. The twins, sitting next to each other, began to discuss the future husband of the younger of them, surprised that he was not at all as terrible and horrible as the gossip said, and perhaps he turned out to be a completely different person. But suddenly, Rinzel's nose started bleeding when she thought of the second prince. Her face turned pale, and the older sister froze in horror, not knowing what exactly could have caused such an unusual reaction in response to his name. Rake hurried out of the room, heading after the doctor, while Rinzel, with trembling hands, wiped the blood from her face, trying not to show her embarrassment and the pain that pierced her at that moment. When she met the handsome man, the lady complimented him with a slight nod, admiringly noting how wonderfully the shirt suited him, emphasizing his refined style and manners. The girl looked thoughtfully out the window. Her thoughts were about her future groom, about what their upcoming marriage would bring, and how everything would turn out in their life when she finally found herself next to him. Outside the window, there was a foreign garden filled with fragrant plants and a babbling fountain. A pleasant aroma hung in the air, which relaxed and created an atmosphere of peace. Hernan walked along the path surrounded by flowering plants. Between them, he walked discreetly with his bride, enjoying the silence that reigned around them at that moment. Suddenly, his steps slowed, and he stopped, standing on his black patent leather shoes, as if something had caught his attention, causing him to concentrate and look around. The guy heard everything well, and his appearance was impeccable. His confidence and calmness, despite what was happening, only strengthened the impression he left. If the first heir to the throne really did resemble his mother, the Empress, then the second son, in turn, inherited all the best traits of his father, possessing undoubted mastery in fencing and unrivaled physical strength. The man, possessing outstanding leadership qualities, confidently led an entire army, repeatedly achieving victories in the most difficult battles, each time proving his ability to be a leader whose determination was not inferior to his physical strength. In the novel, he was portrayed as a villain whose actions were the epitome of cruelty. He stole the woman his brother loved from him, and for this, he received the label of a monster, which society awarded him, condemning his every action and ascribing the worst traits to him. However, despite his reputation as a killer and a demon, this guy looked too cute and innocent as he stood in the garden in a light shirt, his appearance leaving no impression on those who didn't know his past, creating a contrast to his cruel image. The noblewoman walked next to him, her thoughts full of bewilderment. Why did he dress so smartly, as if especially for her? And she could not understand what was the reason for his choice of clothes, so unusual for an ordinary walk. And then, as soon as she noticed his strange behavior, the beauty tripped over something unnoticeable on the ground and began to fall. Her steps became uncertain, and her facial expression ranged from confusion to complete bewilderment. But Rinzel didn't have time to meet the ground, as strong and reliable hands quickly grabbed her and gently pressed her to the man's chest, preventing her from falling, and she felt her heart freeze from the unexpected closeness. Hernan was looking at her from above, with slight concern, his expression full of concern, because he was concerned about her well-being, because the girl almost fell, which of course made him feel responsible for her safety. Rinzel thought to herself that she had found herself in a real fairy tale, feeling herself in the arms of this sweet guy, and at that moment it seemed to her that everything in her life had turned out exactly as she had always dreamed, next to such a person. A tense silence hung between them as the girl once again complimented her companion, praising him for something she particularly liked, and her words once again warmed up the atmosphere, creating a special, intimate connection between them. Suddenly, the nobleman's face came close to hers, their noses almost touching, and this moment became a real test for Rinzel, as well as for him, as if the world around them disappeared, leaving only the two of them in this small and exciting world. Thus, the guy wanted to please the lady by giving her his beauty and attention, and with a serious expression on his face, he asked if she felt better and more pleasant, feeling how his words influenced her perception. Touching the handsome man's face, Rinzel wondered if this was truly heaven on earth. At that moment, forgetting about everything except their closeness, and unable to tear her gaze away from his soulful eyes, the guy stepped back, embarrassed, and with a slight reproach told the lady to be careful with compliments, because she shouldn't have been giving out praise to everyone, especially so sincerely and unexpectedly, because his heart wasn't ready for such words. Suddenly, there was a noise in the bushes, and the couple instinctively turned towards the source of the sound, trying to understand what or who could interrupt them at such a moment when everything around seemed warm and calm, creating a special atmosphere. The aristocrat, smiling a little awkwardly, asked her interlocutor to find a place where they could sit down and rest, since she was a little tired and wanted to spend this moment in a more relaxed atmosphere. Quickly, the nobleman picked up the lady in his arms, wanting to take her to a place where she could relax, so that she would not strain herself and could enjoy this walk, feeling as comfortable as possible in his company. Rinzel snuggled closer to her lover's chest, feeling the warmth of his body, and murmured softly that she really enjoyed hugging him like this, feeling this moment of closeness that was incredibly cozy and important to her. The man's hand, hearing such words, squeezed tighter around her waist, expressing all his tenderness and care. He felt how her words, full of sincerity, made his heart beat faster, and he protected her from the whole world more and more. Asked to repeat the words, Rinzel tenderly repeated how good she felt in the strong arms of her future husband, feeling safe, as if the entire universe was focused only on the two of them. A satisfied smile appeared on the prince's face as soon as he heard his companion's confession, and he, looking at her with love, asked where they would go next, filling the moment with even more harmony and joy shared between them. In addition to the greenhouse, there was a majestic mansion nearby, spreading over a large area, surrounded by greenery, and its architecture created an atmosphere of comfort and luxury, as if inviting them to plunge into an atmosphere of peace and quiet. The couple ended up in the noblewoman's chambers, which were large and decorated in pink tones, creating a girlish atmosphere, full of lightness and dreaminess, as if these rooms were created for the beginning of a new chapter of their lives. A slight blush appeared on the guy's face from embarrassment, and his eyes involuntarily looked away, as if he himself did not know how to react to such open attention from the girl, which made him feel a little awkward. The woman's hand gently lay on the bed, touching the pink fabric of the blanket, thereby creating an intimate atmosphere, as if her every gesture was dictated by a silent desire to create comfort and closeness in this moment. Seeing how much the prince wanted to be praised for his clothes again, Rinzel, smiling a little, repeated her phrase about a beautiful man's shirt, adding a note of tenderness and respect to these words, wanting to please her future husband. The guy laughed at such awkward words, which, despite their simplicity, were sincere, and, smiling, said that besides clothes, she was obviously impressed by something else in him, opening up space for new conversations and revelations. The lady lowered her head and, standing up slightly, approached her future husband. Her gaze was directed at his legs, which attracted attention with their strength and confident posture, as if they themselves spoke of the fortitude and courage of this man. Suddenly, the man stood up from his seat and thoughtfully said that he understood everything, which puzzled the lady, because his words, full of confidence and understanding, made her think about his ability to read her thoughts, which was a little unexpected for her. With a heavy sigh, Hernan said that it was time for him to leave, as he had an important meeting with his family, but his voice sounded with a note of regret, as if he did not want to leave despite his words. But despite what he said, the handsome man was in no hurry to leave. His body froze in silence for a moment, as if he was not ready to leave the girl, and internally wavered between duty and the desire to stay close. The man's hand gently touched the girl's pink hair, running it softly, as if he was trying to convey all his care and tenderness through this light gesture, which was full of warmth and peace. With a cheeky smile, Rinzel couldn't help but ask the guy if he would come to her next time with bare legs, adding a playful note to the conversation that seemed to awaken Hernan's interest and smile. With the same confident look, the second prince replied that, of course, he would come if the beauty wanted it, thereby making her words even more sincere and revealing in himself not only determination, but also a readiness for unexpected requests. After that, the man turned away and headed towards the exit of the room. His steps were confident, but in his gaze, turned towards the door, a shadow of regret flickered, as if he still did not want to leave, despite his words. Rinzel spat out what she had just drunk from her mouth when her sister told her about how Hernan had bought the robe from his brother to meet the bride, which surprised her because she had not expected such care from him. She remembered their previous conversation, where this monster of the empire asked her what she liked about him, and how, at that moment, she couldn't even imagine that this conversation could lead to something important for their future. The noblewoman felt a blush appear on her cheeks, and an awkward smile crept onto her face. She thought that the monster, as she called him, showed no interest in such trifles as fashion and appearance. The relative sitting opposite, resting her head on her hands, suggested that the prince had a lover, since only this could explain his concern for clothes and desires, which, in her opinion, had not existed before. Rinzel shuddered when she heard that the entire duchy already knew about her upcoming wedding with the second heir to the throne, and realized that her personal life had become public news, discussed by everyone. Within a short period of time, the lady became the wife of strange rumors, and although everyone around her was discussing her, she herself could not get rid of the feeling of uncertainty, worrying about the future. The little sister, noticing Rinzel's sadness, hastened to reassure her, saying that everything was all right, and that she was only worried because of the worries that were natural on the road to marriage, especially with a man like Hernan. Looking at her reflection in the cup, the lady began to talk about the reasons for her marriage to the aristocrat, trying to understand for herself why she agreed to such a fate that she had not previously thought about. After which, the beauty quietly began to talk about how she simply liked beautiful faces, and the sweat rolling down her face only emphasized her inner anxiety and uncertainty about the correctness of the choice she had made. Reich, not wanting her relative to sink into depression, reminded Rinzel of the guard she had recently taken a liking to, adding that he was quite handsome, which made the lady slightly dispel her doubts. The memory of a young man with blonde hair and a sweet smile that had left a bright mark on her soul surfaced in Rinzel's mind again, and although she tried to forget it, she couldn't get rid of these images. The maiden paused awkwardly, apologizing for taking Reich's sister's place, and, feeling confused, admitting that she did not feel the same emotions that the real Rinzel had once experienced in a different position. She felt like she was in the dark, trapped, and couldn't remember the face of the guy she had once dated, his image as blurry and incomprehensible as her current life itself. Looking down, the lady realized that she could not remember the faces of her former loved ones, her family members and relatives. Their features and memories seemed to slip away, leaving her in a state of complete isolation from the past. Suddenly, a woman's hand gently touched her face, tenderly bestowing care and warmth, which made Rinzel relax a little, feeling the support that she so desperately needed at that moment. Seeing her sister's reaction, Reich felt that she might have offended her and regretfully apologized, hoping that she had not hurt her feelings, since she only wanted to comfort her. The chair was by the window, offering a beautiful view of the garden and sky, and next to it, by the tea table, were cups with the remains of tea, and next to them, a candle burned dimly, creating a soft, soothing light in the room. Reich, taking the fragrant tea in her hands, expressed with a smile the hope that she had not spoiled her relative's mood, despite her worries, trying to support Rinzel with her presence and warmth. Rinzel winked at Reich, and putting her hand to her chest, added that she was kind not only to attractive people, and that appearance is not the main thing, because true value lies in the soul and sincerity. The woman's hand lay on the other's in support, because the sisters had to support each other, no matter how difficult it was to experience these moments, because mutual understanding is always more important than words. Reich didn't look sick at that moment. On the contrary, she radiated health and happiness. It seemed that everything in her life was turning out exactly the way she wanted it to, and her smile was sincere and warm. However, as Reich slept last night, Rinzel learned of her sister's true feelings and fears as she lay shaking next to her and silently cried, causing Rinzel to wonder about her sister's hidden worries. With a smile on her face, Rinzel mentally apologized to her relative for her previous doubts and, unexpectedly for herself, wondered where the real second main character from the novel was, because perhaps it was not her. Delicious food and drinks on the table, prepared by the chef, created an atmosphere of coziness and luxury, filling the room with aromas that came from the kitchen, attracting the attention of each guest sitting at the table. The emperor, a thin, middle-aged man, looked attentively at his son, who was sitting opposite him, and asked him with interest his opinion about the future bride, expecting an answer that could reveal his feelings. Hernan's hand lay quietly on the surface of the table, and he himself thought that perhaps he really liked Rinzel, because his own feelings for her had begun to develop, and he felt that there was something special between them. Hernan, frowning slightly, added that Rinzel had previously confessed to him that she had fallen in love with him at first sight, which had left him with mixed feelings, but also confirmed his own opinion that her feelings were sincere. The man, hearing his son's revelation, raised his eyebrows doubtfully and expressed the opinion that such frankness with women was not the most reasonable behavior, especially at such an important moment, which caused discontent among other family members. Hernan glared at his father, his gaze full of anger, but he held back, not wanting to create a scene at dinner, even though his words were clearly perceived as an inappropriate comment that hurt his feelings. The family sat around a large table, discussing the future of the second heir to the throne and his marriage to Rinzel. The discussions filled with seriousness, but also with undisguised prejudices about how this wedding would affect the future of the empire. Frowning, Hernan firmly stated that it was Lady Rinzel who had confessed her love to him, her words sounding sincere and confident, which only confirmed his feelings that she had deep feelings for him. The guy was literally glowing with happiness as he sat at the table, his eyes sparkling with joy and his face filled with pride, as he could finally share something that seemed to be important not only to him, but to his family as well. The Empress, a beautiful woman with green eyes and her hair neatly pulled back into a bun, looked at her son with a slight smile and asked him kindly what exactly Rinzel found attractive about him, waiting for an answer. With a serious expression, Hernan replied that he thought Rinzel admired his good looks, stylish clothes, and the most ordinary, but, as he believed, important attributes of a man that could impress her. The family members froze in bewilderment, their eyes widened in surprise, all of them shocked by such a frank admission of their son, which sounded, in their opinion, like something too direct and not quite appropriate for discussion at the dinner table. Hernan himself was behaving strangely. Despite his confidence in his words, his gaze was lowered and his hands were slightly clenched, as if he was trying to hide his inner doubts, sitting on a chair and avoiding eye contact with those around him. When suddenly, the nobleman, like lightning, said something that made everyone present freeze and think. The thought flashed through their heads whether the young couple had gone so far that their relationship had already crossed the line of intimacy. The emperor, feeling the tension in the air, began to tremble with excitement, his hands nervously clutching the cutlery, and despite his outward calm, it was clear that he was worried about the future of his son and his relationship with his future bride. The mother, worried about what was happening, carefully followed every word of her son and his bride, wondering if Rinzel only valued her son's appearance, ignoring his soul and inner qualities, which was especially painful for her. However, Hernan, having decided to take control of the situation, firmly stated at a table filled with delicious food that his bride was not at all so superficial and would hardly appreciate him only for his external attractiveness, because, in his opinion, she was much deeper than that. With sadness and not without disappointment, Hernan added that perhaps Rinzel was the first and last girl who was able to fall in love with him, his monster, despite his oddities and reputation, which further emphasized his inner insecurity. The father suggested that his son invite his beloved to a family dinner when the opportunity arises, in order to get to know her better, communicate in a warm, cozy atmosphere, and strengthen family ties. The second heir to the throne agreed with a smile, adding that Rinzel was a very good, well-mannered, and intelligent girl who would definitely be a great addition to their family and would fit harmoniously into their social circle. Opposite him sat the first prince, who raised an eyebrow in surprise, with a look of bewilderment on his face, his calm and at the same time irritated look betraying his inner dissatisfaction with what was happening. The footsteps that could be heard on the red carpet broke the silence, and the white men's shoes, silently sliding along the surface, gave the whole event a special elegance and confidence. Just as suddenly, the man stopped in place, glanced around, and became motionless, his legs pressed tightly together, as if he was neither taking a step forward nor a step back, as if he was frozen in anticipation. Irritated, Escher turned to his brother, looking at him questioningly, and with a hint of annoyance in his voice, asked how long he was going to continue to follow him, not giving him the slightest space for personal freedom. Hernan didn't waste any time and got straight to the point, asking his brother a direct question about how to successfully highlight his legs, clearly hinting at something deeper and more important than just style. Folding his arms across his chest, the heir to the throne immediately understood what his brother was getting at and realized that he had been copying him in everything lately, from his choice of clothes to even his manner of behavior. Wore crisp white trousers that immediately caught the eye, standing out for their elegance and sophistication, as if emphasizing his desire to be the center of attention. The man involuntarily shuddered, feeling Hernan's intense and searching gaze on him, which seemed to penetrate into the very depths of his thoughts and intentions. Turning away with a slight smile on his face, the handsome man moved away, telling his brother as a farewell that he would figure everything out himself, and, thoughtfully touching his chin, added a mysterious note to his words. The future ruler, left alone with his thoughts, pondered which of the Duke Hernan's charming twins he had chosen as his wife, trying to understand the logic of his choice and his plans for the future. He suddenly remembered that the polite lady who invariably greeted him every time they accidentally crossed paths on the street or somewhere in the city was called Rinzel, and now this name sounded clearly in his head, like a reminder of her kindness and attention. Before his eyes rose majestically a large estate with an elegant mansion surrounded by trees that cast long shadows on the perfectly trimmed lawn, and nearby a fountain shimmered in the rays of the setting sun. When Rinzel finally appeared, she was dressed in a delicate blue dress made of the finest fabric that flowed softly around her figure, and the exquisite jewelry sparkled on her so brightly that she seemed like a real angel who had come down from heaven. With slightly trembling hands, the girl carefully accepted from the hands of the maid the very gift that she herself had chosen and ordered in advance, and now this moment seemed to her both touching and a little funny. Her twin sister, who was standing nearby, leaned closer with a slight smile and asked if the elegant box that Rinzel was holding so carefully was meant for the second prince that everyone was talking about lately. When the lid was removed, the box contained a fine aromatic oil, brought from a distant western region, which was famous for its deep and warm aroma, which could become a true find for those who appreciate refined pleasures and rare things. Pressing a trembling hand to her mouth, Reich said with slight anxiety, and at the same time pride, that if her twin sister was invited to the palace, then it certainly meant that she had managed to please the monster of the empire himself. Having promised in a warm voice to always wait for her at home, Reich, with slight sadness, walked her sister to the carriage, carefully straightened the folds of her dress, and without holding back her emotions, waved her hand, saying goodbye to her. As the carriage moved off and the evening sun illuminated her face, Rinzel, looking out of the window, thought with slight regret that her dear twin sister would probably be dining all alone today. This morning was a real shock for Rinzel, when she literally froze in surprise and excitement upon hearing the news that she would have to go to the palace, where the Imperial family itself would be waiting for her. The father, looking thoughtfully at his daughter, decided to remind her that she had recently been saying how she dreamed of marrying the second heir to the empire, and now it was time to be honest with herself. The lady froze in place, having learned the shocking truth. Her father had been trying to delay her marriage for as long as possible all this time, but now circumstances had made this impossible. The noblewoman, with slight bewilderment in her voice, asked her parent why he did this, whether he was really against her wedding, and what exactly made him take such steps. The man, keeping a stern tone in his voice, explained that every marriage in their world invariably pursued certain political goals, but he never wanted to deprive his daughter of the right to freedom and choice. In the original story, Reich begged her father to find a way to cancel the upcoming marriage, but he was powerless, as it was a direct order from the emperor himself, and his orders could not be disputed. The duke, who sat in a massive, high-backed chair with his hands folded in front of him, looked thoughtful and focused, for he always cared deeply about the well-being and happiness of his children. The aristocrat's office was striking in its scope: walls lined with bookshelves, a massive desk, a comfortable chair, a scattering of documents and papers. All this spoke of his important activities and luxury. The lady hastened to assure that the second prince possessed not only a handsome face, but also a kind, generous soul, which, in her opinion, was capable of captivating the heart of anyone who met him. Moreover, she confidently stated that if Hernan becomes the heir to the throne in the future, then even a marriage without love will not be a cause for regret, because his reign will bring only good to everyone. At the same time, the thought that, thanks to such an alliance, Rinzel would be able to approach the secret storage of the Imperial Palace without hindrance filled her heart with a sense of anticipation. The girl had long dreamed of marrying a man for whom she would be ready to sacrifice everything, even her own life, if it became necessary for his happiness. However, her father's words that his daughter, apparently, had already fallen head over heels in love with the charming prince made Rinzel literally freeze in place from surprise and embarrassment. Unable to contain herself, she screamed indignantly at her father, who only laughed good-naturedly in response, knowing how well he understood his daughter's tastes and her inclination towards such hobbies. The noblewoman rode in the carriage, her head wearily resting on her hand, trying to rest. But thoughts about the upcoming day, full of uncertainty and new challenges, were swirling restlessly in her head, giving her no peace. In the original story, Hernan forced his wife to agree to a marriage that was necessary for political purposes. But despite this, he sincerely wanted to make her life happy and serene. He stood next to her by the majestic statue, illuminated by the soft light of the setting sun, and although he could not say that he felt true love for her, he still felt a deep interest and respect for her. However, being young and inexperienced in matters of relationships, Hernan often turned to his closest assistant for advice, believing that he could tell him how to behave with his wife. This subordinate, wanting to please his master, sometimes gave absurd advice, such as threatening anyone who dared to look at the prince's wife, which only created more problems for Hernan. However, Hernan, completely trusting the words of his assistant, followed his recommendations without hesitation, hoping that this would help improve their family life. Although often everything turned out completely differently. The lady's mind sank into sad thoughts, thinking with sincere regret about her future husband, who, according to the original story, turned into a monster due to misunderstanding and cruelty of the people around him. The palace shone with a multitude of lights, like a living lighthouse in the darkness of the night. Its majestic towers stretched towards the sky, and from their illumination, it seemed that the moon itself was becoming brighter and closer. When the carriage stopped at the entrance to the majestic castle, a woman's foot in an elegant blue shoe smoothly stepped out of it, stepping softly onto the stone slabs of the illuminated street. The worried maid, unable to hide her anxiety, approached her mistress and anxiously asked her not to speak so carelessly because she was very worried about her well-being and fragile health. The servants, noticing the girl's strange behavior, cried out in alarm, asking her questions about her health and trying to understand whether something irreparable had happened to her mistress. The girl stood in the cool evening air, which made her shiver, and her silent, motionless state frightened the maid, who thought that her mistress's weakness might be worse. Looking around, the girl could not understand why there was not a single living soul around. No one came out to greet her, neither the servants nor even ordinary passers-by. Everything seemed strange and disturbing. The aristocrat was left completely alone when her maid ran in a hurry for help, leaving her in the cold air that penetrated to the bone, causing her to shiver in solitude. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, an ominous black raven with bloodshot scarlet eyes appeared against the dark sky, looking at the girl with frightening hatred and sinister interest. Frightened, the girl accidentally tripped over her own suitcases, which were left nearby, and in an attempt to maintain balance, she began to wave her arms helplessly. Unable to keep her feet, Rinzel fell to the ground, her body hitting the hard grass painfully, and her head responded with a sharp, unpleasant pain, which caused her to feel confused and weak. A male figure suddenly appeared in the distance, slowly but surely approaching the fallen girl, as if her fall was a signal for the stranger to come closer. Not far from them stood a man dressed in formal attire, his snow-white hair like a snowstorm contrasting with the dark sky. His expensive suit emphasized his status and self-confidence. Eshar, noticing that the noblewoman was lying on the soft grass, immediately approached her with concern in his eyes. He asked if everything was all right with her, and what could have caused her unnatural position. Deep night covered the earth with a dark veil, and the stars in the sky sparkled like precious stones, creating an enchanting picture that had some mysterious and magical meaning that was difficult to understand. Rinzel pointed to her things lying next to her, small suitcases that she had dropped when she tripped, and now lay untidily nearby, a reminder of her clumsiness at the moment. The nobleman, noticing the state of his companion, politely extended his handkerchief to her, offering to help. His gesture was simple, but full of concern, as if he was really ready to take care of her at that moment. The guy, looking down and absorbed in concern, wondered whether he should call a doctor to examine this amazing girl, whose behavior and appearance hid a secret that required the attention of a professional. Rinzel, looking at the white-haired man with distrust, couldn't help but laugh. There was a mocking tone in her voice, as if she thought he was joking or making fun of her somehow, not taking the situation seriously. With a slight smile on his lips, the nobleman explained that he always contorted his face when he felt excited, and added that he did not want her to take it the wrong way, since his expression might seem strange. Ishar, sitting down next to the lady, tried to create an atmosphere of ease, loudly declaring that he always behaved with ladies exclusively politely and with respect, because he considered this an important part of his upbringing and the duty of a gentleman. The heir to the throne, seeing the girl looking into space with sadness in her eyes, decided that it would be best to keep her company so that she would not feel lonely and abandoned, wanting to create an atmosphere of calm and support. The maiden, feeling the importance of the moment, proudly introduced herself by her full name to the prince, trying to pronounce each word clearly and with dignity, realizing that this acquaintance could influence her future. When Ishar was about to start a conversation, he was suddenly interrupted by the maid, who ran up to them in a hurry and, with anxiety in her voice, said that she had lost her mistress and could not find her, desperately asking for help. Rinzel raised her hand up, trying to attract the attention of those around her, so that they would notice her and their gaze would be fixed on her, because she knew perfectly well that this was the only way she could be heard among the crowd and attract interest. Suddenly, Ishar, without waiting, stood up from his seat and loudly, confidently, and with full confidence, announced that he would soon meet Rinzel again, thereby attracting even more attention and arousing the curiosity of those around him. The beauty silently looked after her new acquaintance, without saying a word, but in her gaze was hidden a whole world of feelings that she did not dare to express out loud, even if it meant keeping her thoughts to herself. The servants, without wasting a minute, quickly rushed to help their mistress, worrying about her health and safety, because she understood perfectly well that the lady's condition was not as stable as she would like, and required constant attention and care. The emperor's palace, of impressive size and majestic architecture, stood in its place. Next to it was the luxurious castle of the second prince, surrounded by greenery and beautiful gardens, which emphasized the grandeur and significance of these places. Ishar was the man Reich fell in love with in the original novel, and his charm, confidence, and tenderness became the cause of her unrequited passion, which overshadowed everything around her and left a deep mark on her heart. While Rinzel looked around, admiring the beauty of the world around her, the servants helped the lady with her things with extraordinary dexterity and attention, as if they were perfectly aware of how important it was for her to feel comfortable and cared for at that moment. Large, luxurious rooms, with majestic ceilings and exquisite interiors, decorated with paintings by great masters on the walls and furniture whose cost could dazzle anyone, created an atmosphere of luxury and well-being. With a slight curtsy, Rinzel curtsied gracefully to the Imperial family, her face expressing respect and dignity, and her gesture was so natural that it remained in the memory of all present as a symbol of her refinement and upbringing. The ruler of the country also warmly welcomed the lady into their home, his voice confident and respectful, emphasizing the importance of this visit and the sign of respect he showed for her presence in his vast and majestic chambers. After which the man, despite his age, smiled a kind and warm smile, saying that his son had talked a lot about the duke's daughter, and this phrase sounded like a sign of respect and interest in her personality, adding lightness and friendliness to the atmosphere. Rinzel couldn't help but notice the attentive gaze of her future husband, who seemed to be watching her every move, and in his gaze there was a mixture of interest and perhaps uncertainty that made her heart beat faster. The boy's ears were red with embarrassment, and feeling awkward, he shyly opened his eyes and coughed into his fist, trying to hide his uncertainty, although his face betrayed internal tension and a desire to avoid unnecessary attention. Rinzel's attention was drawn to the boy sitting next to his brother, or rather, Ishur, with an unperturbed expression on his face. His calmness and confidence created an air of mystery, and despite his cold expression, it was clear that he was a man capable of more than he seemed. Smiling, the handsome man greeted his brother's bride. He was dressed in a white shirt, decorated with stylish accessories, and despite his magnificent appearance, he did not look like the lady's future husband at all. His charisma and manners attracted attention. Rinzel decided to play along with the heir to the throne and pretended that she saw him for the first time, hiding interest and mystery behind this mask of courtesy because she knew that playing with him could be useful in the future, strengthening her position. Then, smiling sweetly and folding her hands in front of her, the maiden greeted her jealous fiancé, her gaze full of respect and courtesy, but in the depths of her eyes a spark of amusement flashed, as if she were ready to throw down a challenge. Hernan, not paying attention to his brother's despondency, complimented his beloved, saying that she was somehow sincere and kind. His words sounded like true admiration, and although they were simple, they gave Rinzel a sense of importance and significance. Suddenly, a gloved palm was extended towards the beauty, and the Empress, not wanting the guest to feel uncomfortable, invited her to sit down, since standing was not so comfortable, creating an atmosphere of care and respect for her position. The woman behaved in a friendly manner towards the Duke's daughter, without expressing any hostility or rudeness. Her manners were refined, and her attitude was warm, which created an atmosphere of hospitality and respect. On the table before the guests was a variety of dishes, skillfully prepared and served: fresh vegetables, aromatic meats, and other delicacies. Each element was laid out with such care that it seemed like a work of art. The aristocrats sat at the table, reserved and respectful, enjoying their meal. Their conversations were quiet, and every movement betrayed their belonging to high society, where every gesture was full of refinement. The man's hand, with a characteristic sound, lowered the cup onto the table, drawing attention to itself, and despite the small movement, this simple action contained a deep meaning, as if emphasizing what was happening. The emperor, as if nothing had happened, with an imperturbable expression on his face, asked Rinzel whether she had fallen in love with his son for his handsome appearance and sweet face, as if this question was ordinary and did not require a response. Hernan, noticing how the bride was almost choking, suddenly jumped up from his place and, quickly approaching her, showed concern. His eyes expressed anxiety, and his actions were full of concern as he sought to help her. The man looked genuinely worried, as if he didn't understand what was going on. His expression was filled with genuine concern, and his concern for Rinzel was so obvious that everyone around him could feel its sincerity. The woman laughed and quietly explained that Rinzel was an honest man, and the Empress always loved and respected such people. Her words sounded with warmth and care, as if emphasizing the importance of honor and dignity. Ishar supported his mother's words, adding that it was impossible to attack Rinzel. His voice was firm and decisive, and his words sounded confident that she deserved only the best. All red with embarrassment, the lady stared at the impudent heir to the throne, her gaze full of indignation and shame, but she could not look away, despite all the awkwardness of the situation that was unfolding before her eyes. Suddenly, the hand of her future husband appeared in front of Rinzel's face, blocking her view, preventing her from looking at the future ruler of the empire, and her attention was now focused on what was happening right in front of her, leaving no opportunity to look at others. The lady stopped in surprise, staring at the evil second prince, the monster who ordered her not to look at his brother. His words sounded like an order, and her gaze was full of bewilderment and confusion from such impudence. Hernan was seriously upset and clearly jealous. His gaze was gloomy, and his behavior showed that he could not calmly watch what was happening. His feelings for Rinzel were much deeper than he wanted to show. Rinzel was quick to reassure the groom, reminding him that their wedding was coming soon and that he shouldn't worry. Her words were soft and encouraging, as if she was trying to ease the tension and give him confidence. The emperor, smiling, declared that his son and daughter-in-law apparently had a good relationship, rejoicing for them. His words were full of approval and pride, and it seemed that he sincerely hoped for the well-being of their union, after which the man became slightly serious and added that he was worried that his boy would be loved not only for his handsome face, but also for his soul. His voice was soft, but there was a sense of care and desire in it for his son to be accepted, not only for his appearance. Taking a cup of tea in her hands, the lady stated that usually a person's character and personality are also reflected in their appearance, her words sounding with dignity and wisdom, as if she knew what she was talking about and wanted to share this observation. Hernan was a military man who had been to war and won. His life experience and courage left an indelible mark, and his look, full of determination and strength, spoke for him without words, making an impression on everyone who met him. The man's face exuded power and strength that attracted the attention of everyone around him, and his presence left no doubt that he was a man capable of influencing the course of events, even with his silence. Placing her hand on her chest, Rinsel continued, saying that, in addition to these cruel traits, she also saw other, softer qualities in her fiancé, which gave her confidence in the correctness of her choice and in their future union. With a blush on her cheeks, the lady also explained that the second prince was a very honest and kind-hearted person, her words sincere and full of respect, as if she truly believed in the good qualities of his character. The war monster could no longer hide his embarrassment and covered himself with his hand, turning red, his face showing obvious confusion, and at that moment all his cruelty and strength disappeared, giving way to human vulnerability and shyness. The parents of the second son were deeply impressed by such a speech and honesty of the daughter-in-law. Their hearts were filled with respect and recognition, because her words were not only sincere, but also full of wisdom, which confirmed her dignity. Waiting for an answer, Rinzel stared at the first prince, her gaze penetrating as she wanted to see how he would react to what was happening, hoping to catch even the slightest emotion that he was hiding behind his calm demeanor. However, Ishar remained calm, without showing any particular emotion. His face was imperturbable, and his inner state was difficult to understand, which only increased the feeling of his secrecy and mystery. From the castle, Hernan carried the beauty in his arms, as she was again very tired and could not walk on her own. His actions were full of care and tenderness, and this moment seemed to remind him that their relationship had become not only public, but also deeply personal. Rinzel could not forget the sad expression on the groom's brother's face. His silent suffering was so obvious that she could not take her eyes off him, feeling how this influence did not leave her heart. Suddenly, Hernan turned to Rinzel with a very important question, thereby attracting attention to himself. His words sounded serious and unexpected, creating an atmosphere of excitement, as if this question could change the course of their relationship. The guy admitted that he was bad at communicating and asked if it was true that the girl wanted to be in a relationship with him. His voice was full of doubt, and his expression was vulnerable, as if he was afraid of hearing an answer that was not what he was hoping to get. The man added that sometimes he was too honest and could leave for the battlefield at any moment and not return. His words sounded heavy, they contained pain and uncertainty, as if he could not get rid of his fate. Hernan asked cautiously if she was okay with that. His gaze was serious, and there was concern in his eyes. He was clearly worried that his words might push Rinsel away, and that added a special tension to the conversation. At these words, the girl calmly placed her palm on her future husband's face, sharing support. Her gesture was soft and gentle, as if she wanted to relieve all his worries and show that she was not afraid of their future. Rinzel explained that it was all just a trifle for love, and she was ready to wait for him. Her words sounded confident and sincere, showing that she was ready to accept him as he was, despite all his doubts and difficulties. The lamps illuminated the buildings at night. The trees, the light from the windows of the houses smoothly dissipated in the foggy air, creating a feeling of coziness and silence, as if this moment was intended for them to enjoy the peace and closeness of each other. Hernan promised that from now on, he would be a good husband to her, would take care of her, because she alone accepted him, not paying attention to bad rumors. His voice sounded confident and sincere. He was ready to prove that he was worthy of her trust. Rinzel herself remembered the vault she needed access to, her thoughts momentarily focused on the important task that needed to be solved, and she felt it distract her from what was happening around her. The girl immediately turned to the groom, saying that she also had one request for him. Her words sounded with a hint of determination. She knew that she had to act quickly to get what she needed. Hernan smiled when he heard the bride's request and asked if he would give his life for her, which was a kind of joke. His laughter was light, but there was seriousness in his eyes, and he sincerely wanted to understand her attitude to his word. The man calmly began to tell, holding the girl in his arms, that he had been at war for a long time, and therefore was not afraid of death. His words sounded confident, and there was something captivating in them, as if he was telling the story of his life, full of adventures and trials. And indeed, the guy led the army and did not care about his life. His words were full of courage, and Rinzel understood how strong his inner selfless desire to go to the end was. The woman nervously clasped her hands in front of her, worried. Her inner anxiety was noticeable, and at that moment she felt the weight of the upcoming conversation, not knowing what to do. Hernan moved his face closer to the beauty, who froze in surprise, not expecting such a turn of events. Her breathing became ragged, and she felt her heart begin to beat faster from the surprise and tension that hung between them. Rinzel closed her eyes and made a duck-like mouth, expecting a kiss from the second prince. Her heart was beating faster, and she felt everything around her freeze in anticipation, hoping for what was supposed to be an exciting moment. However, instead of kissing her on the lips, Hernan touched her forehead with his lips. His gesture was unexpected, and although it was gentle, Rinzel felt a slight disappointment, not expecting such a turn of events. The two of them headed towards the carriage, the man escorting the lady to the transport. His steps were confident, and his presence next to him felt like a protective wall, giving a sense of security. Suddenly, the girl screamed loudly, asking why the second heir to the throne did not kiss her for real. Her voice sounded reproachful and bewildered. She could not understand why her expectations were not met. At these words, the war monster only laughed. His laughter was light and restrained, as if he found the situation amusing and did not intend to delve too deeply into her emotions. With a blush on his cheeks, Hernan promised that he would give her affection next time, and love. His words were soft and filled with sincerity. He wanted to convince her that this moment was not the last, and that other experiences awaited them ahead. With his back to his assistant, the prince turned to him, his voice becoming more serious, and his expression becoming determined, as if he was ready to discuss something important and urgent. It turned out that Hernan wanted to know more details about the Duke and his daughter Rinzel. His gaze became more and more focused, and he realized that the more information he collected, the easier it would be to understand how to behave with his future wife. The guy wanted his subordinate to know everything about his future wife. Tastes, menu, clothes, favorite jewelry. He intended to become her guardian in everything, exploring every detail that could help him better understand her desires and preferences. Covering her eye, the servant suggested that the guy ask Rinzel himself, since his behavior was beginning to resemble a stalker, and her words were full of light irony, reflecting her mockery of Hernan's desire to delve into such details. Raising his finger, Hernan added that he had one more request of his old friend. His face became serious, and although the request seemed unusual, there was something in his tone that left no room for refusal. It turned out that the man wanted to know what kind of pants his brother wore so he could buy the same ones for himself, and this request puzzled his subordinate, because it seemed so insignificant in comparison with more important matters. The subordinate thought about how cruel and hypocritical the lady must have been to dispose of the master's clothes so easily. His thoughts were full of doubts, and he could not understand how Rinzel could be so careless. A large wardrobe of shirts hung on hangers, and its careful organization emphasized the refinement and taste of the owners. Perfect harmony reigned in the closet, creating an impression of wealth and attention to detail that surrounded Hernan. Along with other valuables, unique jewelry, such as earrings and drop earrings, which in the past were only worn by members of the imperial family, including emperors and empresses, were brought in. The lady gave some unexpected advice, claiming that in winter it would be wiser to wear lighter clothes so as not to overheat, and in summer, on the contrary, it is worth dressing a little warmer so as not to catch a cold from sudden temperature changes. Ishar, smiling slightly, turned to Anet to emphasize that she had indeed put in a lot of effort and done a great job that deserves all the praise and recognition. The girl proudly raised her nose to the ceiling, happy that she had managed to please her regular and, one might say, eternal client, from whom she always received many complex orders. However, as soon as pants were mentioned in the conversation, the lady involuntarily closed her eyes and quietly asked for forgiveness for her lack of restraint, mentally assigning herself a punishment for the mistakes she had made. Surprised by her unexpected reaction, the first heir to the throne asked with slight bewilderment what exactly was wrong and why the lady had reacted so strangely to a completely ordinary mention of clothing. An annoyed Ishar quickly realized that his brother had stolen his clothes again, and the new pants he had been waiting for so long would now definitely not be his, but would become part of his relative's wardrobe. The man remembered his brother's piercing and tenacious gaze, who last time carefully studied him from head to toe, paying special attention to the lower part of his clothes as if he was hatching a cunning plan. The store's elegant display windows proudly displayed various accessories for men, including elegant ties, stylish garters, and other little things that emphasized the status and taste of their future owners. The prince looked at the goods in the boutique with obvious interest and attention, carefully choosing a new outfit for himself that would correspond to his status and emphasize his exquisite taste. Among the many decorations, one caught his particular attention, and the young man looked at this exquisite accessory with concentration, as if deciding whether it suited his image. The lady who had just mentioned the strange behavior of her customer's brother suddenly realized her mistake, covered her mouth with her hand, and demurely apologized for her excessive curiosity. Ishar, with a soft and kind smile, reassured her, asking her to continue the story and assuring her that her words were not at all irritating, but only increased the interest in the story. Against the dying light of the sunset, a trembling hand reached out of the window, as if trying to grasp the last rays of the sun, but this gesture conveyed despair rather than hope. The maid, barely holding back her tears, begged her mistress not to leave her in this difficult hour and not to die, when the lady lay, completely exhausted, on her bed from exhausting fatigue. Rinzel, smiling with obvious irony, suggested that the servants play a prank on everyone around them, saying that one of them was supposedly the illegitimate daughter of the Duke, which could cause a wave of unexpected emotions. The maid laughed at her mistress's joke, although the lady's words seemed to be laced with a seriousness that could not be ignored. But the laughter still lightened the tense moment. With her hands folded before her with respect and restrained solemnity, the servant suggested that next time the sister's long-hidden secret be revealed, promising to do so at the appropriate moment. Rinzel, without hiding her gratitude, thanked the maid with warmth in her voice for being able to at least slightly lift her spirits on this difficult and anxious day. Due to poor health and physical weakness, Rinzel could only move with great difficulty, quickly becoming tired and out of breath, which made her life of pain and limitations even more difficult. The servant, standing next to the hostess, who had sat down on the chair, suddenly broke the silence, announcing with a respectful bow of her head the arrival of an important guest whose name had not yet been announced. The heavy door to the ladies' chambers creaked on its hinges and slowly opened, and a man walked in with a confident gait, whose presence instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. Before Rinzel, dressed in an exquisite new outfit that so cleverly emphasized his elegance and charm that it was simply impossible to look away, the lady, due to her infirmity and poor health, was able to express respect to the future ruler by only slightly bowing her head, remaining lying on the bed, but her gesture looked noble. On the girl's shoulder, elegantly covered by the thin fabric of her dress, a bruise was visible, which, despite its insignificance, immediately caught the eye and revealed something hidden from strangers. Ishar, noticing this barely covered trace, involuntarily opened his mouth in surprise, as if trying to find an explanation, for how such a graceful and fragile nature could have received such an injury. The noblewoman was surprised and slightly confused by the man's unexpected question about how she was looked after in this place. His words sounded so worried that they made her think. The prince's face instantly changed, expressing seriousness and deep concern, which seemed to indicate that he was not just interested in her condition, but was sincerely worried about her. The guy, noticing the lady's weakness, began to quickly approach her, asking worried questions about whether her condition was really so serious that she could not even go down to the living room. Hearing that the lady was still feeling a little better than before, he ran his hand through her hair with obvious relief, trying to express his care and support at such a difficult moment for her. However, upon learning that the girl had not washed her hair for a long time, Isha removed his hand with a slight smile, feigning playfulness, and noting that he seemed to sense a faint but unpleasant smell, causing embarrassment. The beauty frowned, put her hand to her temple, which hurt a little, and, straining her voice, asked Ishar with slight irritation why he decided to visit her house at this difficult moment. The man, frowning slightly but remaining calm, explained that while visiting his favorite store, he accidentally heard something important that immediately made him go there without delay. Sitting on the edge of the noblewoman's bed, Ishar began to complain with visible irritation that recently someone from his circle had begun to regularly steal his clothes or get ahead of him by buying outfits that he planned to take first. As it turned out, this trickster was his younger brother Hernan, who was eager to impress his bride by using every opportunity to highlight his style and taste. Ishar noticed that one night he was wearing exactly the same shirt as Hernan, which caused a lot of puzzled looks among their entourage and embarrassed the future ruler himself. The future ruler couldn't help but shudder when he heard the words that perhaps his younger brother simply wanted to be more like his older brother, which seemed to add a comical, yet slightly disturbing tone to the situation. The girl, covering her mouth with her hand, joked with a slight smile that, despite such situations, the brothers have good relations, because only close people can allow themselves such antics. However, Ishar, as if wishing to avoid further discussion of this awkward issue, suddenly changed the subject and stated that he knew perfectly well that his marriage with his brother's fiancée was purely a political alliance. The noblewoman pressed her hands to her chest with obvious excitement, her eyes trembling when it came to the fact that Reich was originally supposed to be the wife of the Empire's monster, and not Rinzel, which caused her anxiety. The future ruler, noticing that the lady had begun to cough violently, hurried to her with an expression of concern. His movements were quick and nervous, and his voice trembled when he asked if she was that bad. Rinzel felt her weak body shake from the shock that had washed over her. Her breathing was ragged, her face was pale, and the trembling throughout her body indicated that her health could not withstand such stress. Suddenly, the silence of the room was broken by the sound of the door opening, and Reich, Rinzel's sister, appeared on the threshold. Her sudden appearance instantly added tension, and her gaze stopped on the couple. Reich caught the young couple in a position that seemed too intimate. Her face reflected a mixture of pain and disappointment, as if what she saw was a strong blow to her. The girl's face was distorted with bitterness. Her eyes darkened, her lips trembled, and her hands involuntarily rose to her chest, as if she was trying to protect herself from the pain that had overwhelmed her. The girl, holding back her emotions, bit her lips to keep from crying. Her eyes were full of tears, which she tried to hold back with all her might, because she did not want those around her to see her weakness and the experiences that tormented her soul. Quickly turning away from the scene, Reich hurried out of the room, her steps quick and determined, her heart beating faster as she could no longer stay in this place filled with tension and pain. The woman's hand tightly clutched the pink fabric of her dress, her fingers digging into it for a moment, as if trying to stay in place. And in her soul, emotions raged that she wanted to explain to her sister, because all this was a misunderstanding that would hardly ever be resolved. The prince suddenly broke the silence and turned to Rinzel, his voice sounding genuinely concerned as he asked why her twin was acting so strangely, and then curiously asked if the lady had enjoyed living in the Duke's house, as if trying to understand what was going on. The guy sincerely could not understand what led to such behavior of the lady. His bewilderment was obvious when he asked why she behaved so offended, abruptly leaving the chambers, leaving behind only the rumble of footsteps that were heard along the corridor. Rinsel could not answer the question regarding her sister, who was secretly in love with the prince, but the girl, trying to avoid awkwardness, answered that it was indecent for a lady to be in the same room with a man alone. After that, Rinzel, feeling awkward and afraid inside, tried to hide her feelings behind a mask of a slight smile that seemed sweet, but in reality it was full of anxiety and embarrassment that raged in her soul. Ishar, not quite sure, asked if Rinzel was truly happy in this place, his voice sounding with a hint of concern, because he sincerely wanted to understand how she felt, but his question caused anxiety in her heart. This repeated question made Rinzel wary. She could not understand what exactly he wanted to know, because the answer was not as obvious as it seemed, and doubt arose in her eyes about what was hidden behind this question. Suddenly, like an invisible shadow, the reason for his concern ran past. Ishar noticed a bruise on Rinzel's shoulder, which became the alarm signal that did not give him peace, and his thoughts began to turn sharply, wondering what was happening in her home. Ishar, consumed by thoughts about what happened, could not help but think that she might have been beaten in her house, and this fear that she could have experienced something so cruel made his heart clench with pain, because he could not allow this. There was silence, and the beauty froze, absorbed in her inner thoughts, with an imperturbable face, for a long time realizing the words of her companion, which echoed in her heart as something unexpected and disturbing. She suddenly flinched as the meaning of what had been said finally sank in, and her face became more intense, reflecting the internal struggle that had begun the moment those words had pierced her consciousness. Raising her hand up, Rinzel weakly protested that Ishar had misunderstood, her voice unsure, but she was trying to convince him that her words had been distorted, and he should have understood her differently. The lady anxiously tried to convince the prince that there had been no violence and that her father had always treated his daughters with respect, and she was not worried that he could do anything terrible to her. Squeezing his eyes shut, Ishar too began to realize that perhaps Rinzel had truly been forced to marry this war monster, and his eyes reflected pain, as if everything she had gone through had struck him in the heart. Upset and with a forced smile, the guy was confident in his words that this maiden, despite all her attempts to hide the truth, was clearly forced to take as a husband an evil and cruel warrior, with whom her life could not be happy. As a child, Ishar himself often faced harsh words and the heavy hand of his father, and despite this, he grew up with an awareness of pain, but also with a determination not to let such circumstances break his spirit. The future ruler promised to help the lady escape, to give her a chance for salvation and freedom from what bound her, promising to protect her from everything that threatened her future if she decided to trust in his help. The beauty turned away from the guy, not wanting to accept help, resolutely insisting that she was fine and that she was able to cope on her own, despite the internal struggle and doubts that lurked in her eyes. Ishar was deeply moved by the lady's continued defense of her family, despite all the horrors and pain she had suffered because of their actions, and his heart was filled with respect for her resilience and inner strength. Turning away, the man ordered the beauty to prove her words, claiming that only in this case he would believe her, and if she could not show that everything was really okay, then he would have no choice but to continue his efforts to save her. At this moment, a maid burst into the room and hurried to her mistress, anxiously asking if the lady's cough had passed, for her health was still a matter of concern, and even such trifles could not be ignored. Rinzel asked the maid to hurry and help her out of bed. Her body was still weak and every step was difficult, but she was determined and was not going to stay in bed any longer than necessary. The window opened onto the backyard, where a garden was located among the greenery. Flowers were fragrant, and fountains filled the air with coolness and peace, creating an atmosphere of peace that calmed her heart. The lady's foot stepped carefully onto the grass. Her shoes barely touched the ground. Her steps were quiet, almost imperceptible, as if she wanted not to disturb the silence and not to disrupt the harmony of this beautiful corner. In the original novel, Reich often visited the greenhouse when she was feeling ill, taking refuge among the greenery and flowers, where she could find peace and tranquility while her body recovered from the trauma of her experiences. Together with the maid, Rinzel went to her sister, hoping to talk about what happened and figure out what happened, trying to uncover the mystery and find the answers that so troubled her heart. Reich turned away, not wanting to listen to her relative and intending to run away. Her face was determined, and her eyes were full of displeasure, as if she was trying to run away from what she might learn or experience at that moment. The maid, standing worriedly nearby, did not dare to let her mistress go, afraid to leave her alone in such a vulnerable state. But Rinzel insisted, assuring that everything would be fine, and she did not need anyone's support at the moment. The maiden began to calm her relative, assuring her that Prince Ishar had come only to inquire about her health and nothing more, explaining that all these rumors and suspicions were unfounded and there was no need to worry. Reich apologized to her sister for her rude behavior earlier, and Rinzel warmly accepted the apology, smiling softly as if to indicate that she was willing to forgive, leaving all misunderstandings in the past. Frustrated, the sister muttered that Rinzel should hate her for everything that happened, but her words sounded with genuine regret, as if she couldn't forgive herself for her actions. However, the main character understood everything perfectly well, and, despite all her feelings, did not want to spoil her relationship with her family, because she realized how difficult it would be for her sister to cope with what she experienced, being in such a difficult situation. After all, Reich clearly had feelings for the first prince, and it was probably extremely difficult for her to eavesdrop on Rinzel's frank conversations with him, knowing that it was not just a discussion of health, but something more that caused her pain. The sunset slowly fell on the mirrors of the greenhouse, reflecting bright rays, creating an amazing atmosphere where nature and artificial elements merged into one whole, as if this moment was perfectly constructed. Reich froze in shock when she heard from her relative that Ishar came to find out if Rinzel was being bullied in her home. Because for her, this news was so unexpected that she could not immediately believe what was happening. Clutching her head, the beauty began to scream that the man had misunderstood everything, and now, after learning the truth, he believed that her family was really making fun of her, and her sister only laughed, watching her panic. The ladies stood side by side, their skirts almost touching the soft grass and their shoes touching the ground, creating a feeling of lightness and weightlessness as silence reigned around, only the rustle of the wind breaking the moment. Turning away, Reich sheepishly admitted that she loved the future heir to the throne with all her heart, as if this secret had been hidden for a long time. And now, finally, she could no longer hide her feelings, feeling both shame and relief. The younger sister could no longer hold back her tears, and, without holding back her emotions, she began to cry in front of the older girl, who, in turn, began to gently calm her sister, hugging her and trying to restore her peace of mind. Tears fell like rain and fell to the ground as the aristocrats embraced in the garden, surrounded by greenery, where peace and silence created an atmosphere where words were not necessary, only support and care. Having made peace with her twin, Rinzel wondered how she could now convince the first prince that her family truly loved her, despite all the difficulties and misunderstandings she had to face recently. Suddenly, with a determined expression on her face, the lady turned to the twin, saying that she had to come face to face with a terrible lion, using a metaphor to explain the gravity of the situation and the significance of the upcoming decisions. A whole day passed, and the wheels of the carriage hit the stone road with a loud clatter, producing sounds that echoed throughout the surrounding area, like a harbinger of important events to come. When the transport finally stopped, the carriage found itself at the stairs, and a man dressed in formal attire began to descend, his steps confident and calm, like someone who is used to being the center of attention and is not afraid of any challenges. It was Hernan, dressed in expensive clothes that emphasized his status, and he himself was surprised that he had arrived so early, finding that there was no one around, and that everything around seemed to be preparing for something important, but which had not yet begun. Concerned, the handsome man leaned down next to Rinzel, noticing that she was holding her head, expressing concern that perhaps she had become ill, and he felt his heart fill with worry for her condition. With a blush on her cheeks, the lady joked that if she died today, it would only be the guy and his irresistible beauty who would be to blame, with a slight irony in her voice, which added fun to the tense atmosphere of their meeting. With a cheeky smile on her face, Rinzel began to show off her outfit, a dress that hugged her beautiful figure perfectly, and she proudly emphasized how elegantly it sat on her, adding confidence to her appearance. Previously, the maid and the lady herself had assessed the dress, and, without exaggeration, it was the most ideal dress that any girl could boast of, because it was so perfect that even the most persistent guys could not resist its charms. But instead of the expected compliments, Hernan suddenly began to carefully tie a white cloth around the lady's waist, saying that, in his opinion, the beauty looked too naked and his concern was obvious, despite her attractiveness. Upset and slightly disappointed, Rinzel said that she chose the dress with the intention of showing it to the prince, hoping that he would appreciate her outfit. But unfortunately, instead of joy, he began to show jealousy, which upset her. Suddenly, a man's hand reached for the girl's waist, and although his actions were not too unexpected, there was some tension in this moment, as if he himself did not understand what exactly was driving him. After which, Hernan, resolutely picking her up in his arms, sternly said that if she wanted to show him her new dress, it would be better to do it in private, and not in front of everyone, hinting that intimate moments should remain personal. The noblewoman laughed joyfully, readily agreeing to carry out all the orders of the second heir to the throne, and her eyes sparkled with merriment, despite the strangeness of the situation, which seemed to her both funny and exciting. The war monster made a loud statement, disregarding style, and declared that he did not care what her dress looked like, as long as she wore it. And, not paying attention to those around him, he continued to carry her in his arms, moving forward resolutely. The faces of the young couple were very close to each other, their gazes intertwined, and gentle smiles and light touches revealed that there was something more between them than just flirting. They were flirting with each other, enjoying this moment. The man stepped back, suddenly deciding to change the subject, and asked the aristocrat with interest if she liked his new trousers, which he, of course, accidentally stole from his brother, while adding something playful with a grin. Understanding flickered in her eyes as she realized what the prince was talking about, and although her gaze was light and mysterious, she couldn't help but feel how carefully he chose his words, as if he was toying with her at that moment. Rinzel, however, did not lose her head and began to speak with a touch of irony, exclaiming that for such a stately man as he, there could be no things that would not suit him, not noticing how her words smoothly turned into a play on words and flirtation. Together they went to the girl's room, where she, as if accustomed to such situations, sat in the arms of her companion, completely confident that this closeness was not just external, but something deeper. The prince's subordinate, standing a little to the side, bowed respectfully, ready to carry out any instructions, waiting for the command, because his duty was to serve his master and not ask unnecessary questions, simply obeying. Also in the room were Hernan and his future bride, who was sitting on a soft bed. Her posture was relaxed, but in her eyes, full of expectation, one could notice a certain tension that she was trying to hide. I recalled one vivid moment from the novel, when a subordinate, in a fit of rage, shouted at his master, demanding that he tear out the eyes of his enemies if they dared to threaten his beloved. This scene was filled with cruelty and desperate affection for the master. This guy, now leaving his master, was the cause of many of Hernan's troubles and mistakes, and his stupid advice eventually led to Hernan becoming what many would later consider a villain, drowning in his own delusions and attachments. Raising her finger in the air, Rinzel scornfully stated that the war monster should have thought for himself instead of blindly following the advice of others, succumbing to the influence of those who did not understand the full gravity of the consequences. Hernan, unable to bear her reproaches, resolutely objected, declaring that his loyal subordinate had always supported him and helped him out in the most difficult situations, and therefore his opinion, despite all his mistakes, was important to him. In fact, the assistant had been at Hernan's side much longer than the noblewoman herself, and over the years of service a deep bond of trust had formed between them. This was why Hernan, despite all his faults, trusted his old friend more than any other advisor. Rinzel awkwardly folded her hands in her lap, sheepishly changing her mind and clarifying that she meant that a man should think for himself, but only in matters of love, where it is better for him to trust his heart rather than other people's advice. Hernan paused for a moment, considering her words, and then, with a slight sigh, agreed that his subordinate, despite all his devotion, was not at all knowledgeable about matters of love, and his advice in this regard was not worth listening to. Kneeling down in front of the beauty, he added with a serious look that in their marriage he would listen only to her, since she had become the main and only authoritative figure for him, whose opinion was of the greatest importance to him. At that moment, the guy didn't look like a menacing war monster, but rather like a sweet, caring husband who was willing to admit his weakness in front of a woman he trusted and valued immensely. The room had a cozy atmosphere. There was a kettle of hot tea on the table. The shelves were full of books, and the jewelry boxes and expensive furniture created a feeling of coziness and comfort, emphasizing how carefully this place had been arranged. With her hands folded in front of her, the lady proposed that from now on, all matters concerning love should be decided exclusively between the two of them, without the intervention of outsiders and without unnecessary words, as this was important for their relationship. When suddenly, Hernan, abruptly stopping his steps, turned to the girl and told her that someone could be outside the room and possibly eavesdropping on their conversation, which jeopardized their private conversations and violated their intimate atmosphere. The men's footsteps sounding on the floor seemed to be getting closer, but the man listened and, deciding that the disturber of the peace was already close, was ready to punish the one who would dare to invade their privacy and violate their personal space. The man listened, trying to catch every sound, and was ready to punish whoever dared to disturb their peace, since this was considered unacceptable in such moments of solitude. Hernan then turned and walked back to the lady, assuring her that whoever it was had already left, and they no longer had to worry about their conversation being overheard. The prince shrugged and admitted with slight bewilderment that he had no idea who could be eavesdropping on their conversation, which only added to the uncertainty of what was happening. It was Reich who breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that her presence had not been noticed, and she could continue her actions without any unnecessary attention from those around her. The girl became curious about how the monster of the empire treated her sister, and so she decided to conduct her own investigation to find out what was really going on in their relationship. The aristocrat froze in the middle of the room, relieved and glad that everything was all right with her relative, both with her fiancé and with her future, since their family's reputation depended on it. A woman's hand reached out to the cabinet, carefully touching the handle to open it and find out what was hidden behind this door, because inside there were books and strange ancient records. The cabinet contained books and records, ancient and mysterious, which made Reich even more curious, as she couldn't miss the chance to learn more about the secrets hidden within those pages. Reich was willing to make any sacrifice to succeed, and, frozen next to her desk, she continued to read, devouring every word as if she were finding the key to her destiny. With a cold expression on her face, the lady loudly declared that she had to survive at any cost. Her determination was so great that nothing could shake her confidence in this. The sky was visible through the window, and the vastness of nature beyond it was in contrast to the tense atmosphere in the room. Hernan embarrassed his wife's maid by saying that her cheeks were like dough, so big and soft that they made him feel awkward and laugh. But at the same time, the analogy left a strange mark on the conversation. The man then added coldly that as a child he had often punched dough, so now such comparisons seemed normal to him, although they clearly did not correspond to the situation, creating a tense atmosphere. Rinzel raised her hands, not knowing how to tell her fiancé that his words could have greatly offended the maid, and that she was probably scared to death. But her silence only added to the misunderstanding at this moment. Suddenly, the handsome man stood up from his seat and announced that it was time for him to leave, creating a certain tension in the room, as if his departure was something important and inevitable, although everyone around him still remained in anticipation. The hands of the future newlywed couple were joined, their fingers intertwined, and it seemed that their connection was not only physical, but also emotional, and every gesture, every touch was filled with meaning and future commitment. The emperor was a serious man who treated his promises with due respect, despite the fact that his appearance might lead one to think that he was kinder and gentler than he actually was. How Rinzel suggested that the four of them, she and her sister, and Hernan, and his brother, meet for a meal as if it were a simple and natural idea to bring the families closer together before an important step in their lives. The second prince became curious about the reason for such a meeting, trying to understand what could have prompted her to propose something as informal as a dinner meeting, which left Rinzel slightly confused. The noblewoman stuttered and suggested that it could be a friendly meeting, since they would all soon be a family, hoping that her words would sound convincing and no one would notice her nervousness. For the guy, these words were a real shock, and he literally blossomed with happiness, his face lit up with a wide smile. He could not hide his joy, and it was noticeable. His heart was filled with warmth from her proposal. The man, blushing and coughing into his fist, sheepishly admitted that he agreed to organize everything necessary, although his excitement was noticeable, and he obviously tried to hide his embarrassment, but still held back his answer. The guy, carefully and confidently, putting on his outerwear, was completely focused on this process, when the lady, watching his actions, with sincere interest, wished him good luck and a good journey, which gave the situation a special touch. The guy had broad shoulders, which emphasized his physical strength and confidence, in contrast to his narrow waist, which gave him a harmonious and at the same time masculine look that could not help but attract attention. Hernan, noticing the lady's words, turned his head in her direction with interest, listening to her remark that the outfit would be better if it contained only 3 things, and his gaze became sharper, as if he was trying to understand what exactly she meant. As soon as Hernan's gaze accidentally caught on the object that once belonged to his brother, his heart involuntarily sank. This thing somehow ended up in the chambers of the future wife of the Empire's monster, and it was strange. Night had swallowed the world, and in the mansion, while the evening dinner was still going on, a soft light came from the windows, and beyond them the sky was decorated with bright stars, as if the whole world had frozen, swallowed up by the mysterious silence of the night. The father, sitting in his chair, could not help but notice how his second son was visiting his bride more and more often, and, making fun of him, mockingly noted this behavior, as if he had a premonition that some changes were waiting for them ahead. On the other hand, Ishar, noticing how his brother was hurrying, could not bear it any longer and stopped him, shouting his name, being clearly excited by what was happening and trying to understand what exactly was making Hernan hurry so much, as if he was hiding something important. When he continued walking without stopping, ignoring his brother, the latter shouted in anger that he should not be ignored any longer, because he was irritated that his brother was showing such coldness and avoiding him as if he did not notice. With a heavy sigh, Hernan stopped. His face became more serious, and, turning to Ishar, ordered him to speak briefly and to the point, making it clear that he had no time for empty talk and that it was necessary to resolve important matters as quickly as possible. With an irritated look, Ishar, seeing how his brother was once again trying to avoid responsibility, confidently mockingly stated that the trousers he was wearing seemed surprisingly familiar to him, hinting that it was he who stole them last time. After that, with his usual ironic manner, Ishar folded his arms across his chest and added with a grin that next time he would definitely keep an eye on Hernan, hinting that he was not always able to remain unnoticed. Thoughtfully, Hernan paused, reflecting on how easily his brother switched his attention to personal trivialities, and with a barely noticeable grin suggested that Ishar might be playing some kind of 3 for the purpose of humor. However, despite all the sarcasm and discord, Hernan could not help but notice his brother's words concerning Rinzel. They suddenly threw him off balance, and his face darkened with concern. The Empire monster, unable to hide his anxiety, asked anxiously what had happened to his beloved, his voice sounding with notes of confusion and worry, as if something important had been lost, and he could not understand what exactly. The guys began to ponder the strange situation, because earlier Reich was supposed to become the bride of this handsome man, but suddenly, as if by the wave of an invisible hand, the twins unexpectedly changed places, which caused a lot of questions and bewilderment among those around them. Then the conversation turned to the fact that there were visible bruises on Rinzel's body, and this unexpected detail made everyone silent, because the signs of violence were obvious, and this could indicate that something terrible had happened. Ishar, standing in complete confusion, froze, not knowing how to continue the conversation. His gaze was focused and serious, and his frowning brows reflected internal anxiety, as if he was trying to find the right words, but could not. Finally, the heir to the throne admitted that, despite his best efforts to hide his thoughts, he suspected that Rinzel had been abused by her own family, and this thought tormented him, leaving a bitter feeling of anxiety and uncertainty in his soul. And it could well be that the noblewoman married the monster of the empire, not of her own free will, but simply as a replacement for her sister, forced to submit to circumstances that were beyond her control, and she could not make any other choice. Someone from the duke's family beat the poor lady, and she endured the beatings, hiding her pain and suffering, holding back her tears, and accepting the blows of fate as if this was her only way to preserve at least some remnant of dignity. The memories of how sincerely the noblewoman spoke words of love to him, her look full of tenderness and devotion, as well as quiet promises that now seemed so distant, as if it were a dream, surfaced in the mind of the second prince. Hernan blushed, unable to contain his emotions. His ears were burning with shame and excitement. His face was red as if he had been caught doing something shameful, and his heart was beating at a frantic pace. And therefore, most likely, if the beatings were true, she would have told him everything, unable to hide the truth, and her frankness would have been inevitable, because such suffering could not remain unnoticed and unspoken, especially in her situation. The second prince firmly told his brother that this theory should first be thoroughly checked, and then, if all the evidence was confirmed, act according to the situation. And for this, the guy had time tomorrow, when he could calmly sort out this matter. The nobleman calmly explained that the next day they had an important meeting with the twin sisters, the duke's daughters, and this was a matter of the first order, requiring his full attention, so everything else had to be postponed. Hoping to please his beloved, the prince suggested that they meet the day after tomorrow after lunch, so that everything would be calm and without haste, and they would have enough time for conversations and meetings without being distracted from current concerns. Ishar muttered irritably, with a smile that apparently no one was interested in his opinion, and all the plans and decisions had already been made without his participation. But nevertheless, he agreed to the meeting, resigned to the circumstances that he had to accept. The heir to the throne was torn from his thoughts, wondering which clothing store he should go to choose a new outfit, because he needed something special that would match his status and reflect his position in society. A man with bright, almost glowing eyes entered the store, where a saleswoman was already waiting for him with new sets of clothes, ready to offer him something that would suit his taste and requirements, although she was nervous about the upcoming meeting. The lady, trying to hide her excitement, presented him with new three-piece suits, but afraid to tell the truth, she only sheepishly added that these were the latest innovations, despite the fact that not all of them could fully meet his high requirements. She was shaking with fear, holding on to the hangers with suits, and with difficulty said that many new suits had arrived in the store, because it was important to her that each of them fit perfectly and left only the best impressions of it. One of them was dark in color, with exquisite patterns on the fabric, elegant and understated, a classic men's suit that seemed perfect for a man of his position. But with this choice, she was clearly hoping for his approval. With a smile, Ishar did not argue with the lady's choice and agreed to his proposal, asking him to send the outfit before the evening, after which he said goodbye, leaving her slightly perplexed by such a quick and confident decision. The beauty froze awkwardly from such a quick choice of outfit. Her face turned red, and sweat dripped down her forehead, because she did not expect that such a decisive and calm man would so easily agree to her choice, as if there were no doubts or hesitation. Right after his brother's arrival, Hernan himself showed up, asking the seamstress to send him the same suit as his relative, because he believed that such an important event should not take place without appropriate equipment that would emphasize his status. The room was comfortably furnished. There was a table by the window on which stood a kettle of hot tea. The weather was fine in the room, and the expensive furniture, beautifully arranged, gave the room a special charm, creating an atmosphere of peace and luxury. The maid, seeing the letter in her mistress's hands, joked, saying that she had been sent a love letter, to which the lady embarrassedly replied that it was just ordinary correspondence, but the maid, of course, did not miss the opportunity to tease her mistress. The letter was carefully opened. the red stamp removed, and from the envelope slipped a message belonging to the second prince, which contained important information for the recipient. The letter informed her that the meeting of the families would take place the following afternoon, at about 4 o'clock, and that she could expect the prince at the duchy to discuss all the important details of the upcoming meeting. The noblewoman smiled, delighted at how quickly Hernan solved any issues and made decisions, as if there were no obstacles for him, and everything always went according to his plan, creating a feeling of confidence and reliability. In the hands of the maid was a tray, and on it was an unappetizing-looking liquid in a bowl, which emitted a disgusting smell and seemed not only unpleasant to look at, but also dubious in its nature, causing one to freeze in horror. The maiden winced as she took the dishes from the maid's hands, feeling her strength fading with each passing day and becoming weaker, feeling her body resist with each sip, but she couldn't afford to refuse. In one decisive gulp, the beauty drank the unpleasant liquid, closing her eyes in disgust, knowing that this was her obligation, and she had no choice but to submit to this test that had become a part of her life. After which she sat down on the bed, deciding to sleep a little and gain strength, sending the maid to rest as well, realizing that now she needed time to recover in order to be ready for the upcoming meetings and events. The lady fell back onto the soft pillows, covering herself with a blanket, and quietly told herself that she would sleep until Reich returned, hoping that this short rest would give her the strength to cope with the difficulties that lay ahead. Unlike Rinsel, her sister often attended social events. Her energy did not fade during the day, and she was full of vitality, always ready for new meetings and communication, which Rinsel, tired of constant worries, often could not understand. The woman's hands clutched the fabric of the blanket restlessly. Her body was overcome with fatigue that did not give her peace, and even at such moments it seemed to her that this fatigue was eternal and not temporary, preventing her from finding any relief. Beginning to shake her head from side to side, Rinsel sternly reminded herself that she shouldn't be jealous of her sister, because her path was different, and her success shouldn't make her feel that way, because every person was unique in their efforts. The lady calmly asked the maid's opinion whether she could ever become healthy and live to old age, looking into the eyes of her faithful friend, as if hoping for some answer that would give her confidence in the future. The worried maid began to shout at her mistress not to say such terrible things again, her voice trembling with excitement, because she could not allow her mistress to lose hope and think about such a gloomy future. Rinsel had to get out of bed and start calming her friend down so she wouldn't cry, because it was hard to see her cry, and she couldn't allow herself to be drawn into such dark thoughts, despite her own fatigue. The room was filled with soft light. The wind gently swayed the pink curtains, and the atmosphere of luxury was created by the exquisite interior that surrounded it, as if specially created to give peace and comfort. The maid carefully covered her mistress with a blanket, who, having overcome her fatigue, quickly fell asleep, plunging into a deep sleep, because her body had long been demanding rest after a day full of worries and anxieties. Slowly, the beauty began to open her eyes, waking up from a strange voice that seemed to penetrate her dreams, stretching out time and forcing her to return to reality, where questions and omissions awaited her. She found herself in a void where there was nothing, only endless silence, and a long robe that hung to the floor, as if symbolizing loneliness and oblivion in this strange and empty place where there was neither beginning nor end. Her attention was drawn to the sound of crying. It was the maid who stood by the body of her sleeping mistress, who had not woken up, and her sobs, filled with grief, pierced the silence, creating a feeling of hopelessness and fear, as if she was part of something terrible. There, among the flowers, lay the body of a lady, but it was dead. Her lips withered, her eyes closed, as if she had been abandoned forever, and this terrible image was imprinted in Rinziel's memory, causing her to feel an unthinkable premonition. Rinzel covered her mouth in horror, realizing that this was the fate of the original heroine from the book she had been so fascinated with, and now, standing before this vision, she couldn't help but feel like she had been dragged into this horrible scenario herself. Her bare feet, feeling the cold floor, began to move, and her steps became more and more confident, but each step seemed more and more unreal, as if she herself had become a part of something that could not be stopped. Suddenly, Rinzel shuddered, and she woke up in the real world. Darkness surrounded her, as if the nightmares did not leave her, and she tried to come to her senses, feeling how reality and sleep were intertwined, and her body could not believe what was happening. Her hands on the bed, under the blanket, were shaking, her fingers clenched in a spasm, as if her body could not calm down, and the pain, from which there was no shelter, was getting stronger, making her heart beat faster. The lady felt terribly ill. Her body was overcome with weakness, and she realized that she should not have gone to bed immediately after eating. Her body was protesting, and now the consequences were felt in every cell of her body. The lady stared at her hands in surprise as blood began to flow from her mouth. She froze in shock, unable to understand what was happening to her body, and this feeling of uncertainty and fear enveloped her like a fog hiding reality. Darkness was everywhere. Only occasionally, stars flickered in the sky, like weak lights in the ocean of night, creating a strange atmosphere of loneliness and hopelessness, as if the world around her was disappearing into this obscurantist void. The window was open and the curtain was drawn, letting in the dim light of the night, which could not illuminate her thoughts, but somehow still reminded her of the world outside this room, of the fact that life went on despite her internal struggle. Reich cried bitterly, wiping away her tears, her heart breaking with fear and worry for her sick sister's health, because she couldn't allow anything bad to happen to her, not knowing how she would live without her. Turning away, the girl admitted to herself that she was afraid of being left alone in this world, if her sister died, because her life was connected with her, and the thought that she could lose her made her soul plunge into a dark abyss of despair. Grabbing her twin by the shoulders, Rinzel firmly said that she would never leave and would stay alive, her voice sounding determined, as if she was trying to convince not only her sister, but herself of this promise. The relatives hugged each other, and the lady's hands tightly squeezed Reich's waist, as if trying to convey to her all her strength and support, assuring her that she was not alone in this world, and that they would be together no matter what. Rinzel wiped the tears from her twin's face and gently stroked her cheeks, expressing all her support and tenderness, trying to comfort her sister in this difficult moment, when the world seemed so fragile and unstable. The lady asked the twin not to cry and to calm down. Her words sounded soft but with inner strength, because she did not want to see her sister suffer, and tried to give her hope that everything would be okay, despite the pain and worries. Reich, with concern in her voice, asked the maiden to always let her know if something hurt, because she could not allow her sister to suffer alone, and she was ready to be there to support her in any situation. Remembering the meeting with the princes, the beauty pushed her sister away and told her everything about the next meal. Her words sounded like a reminder that in a world full of worries, there is at least one moment that needs to be shared with a loved one. Reich stood awkwardly in silence, her face going blank, as if all her feelings had disappeared, leaving only a feeling of uncertainty and fear that she couldn't control what was happening around her. The girls crossed their little fingers and promised each other that they would always be together. It was not just a promise, but an oath expressing their affection and willingness to support each other in the most difficult situations. A fine day, a clear blue sky, above which a vast expanse stretched out, and next to it, a large mansion filled with comfort and silence, created an atmosphere of peace in which it seemed there could be no room for worries and anxieties. The noblewoman was adjusting her hair with her hand when she suddenly noticed a guest in the house. His presence was unexpected, and for a moment she froze, as if trying to understand what brought him here at this moment. The second prince came and greeted the bride politely. His words were soft, and his gaze was balanced, but behind the outward politeness there was tension, which only added mystery to their meeting. When pressed about her health, Rinzel covered the guy's mouth with her hand, calmly and firmly saying that everything was fine. Her gesture was decisive, as if making it clear that she did not want to discuss the topic further. More importantly, the man wore a three-piece suit and looked wonderful in it, reserved and formal. Like a true gentleman, every detail in his appearance emphasized his status and elegance, which attracted attention. The lady used her hands to unbutton one button to make the groom look more attractive. Her actions were soft but confident, as if she wanted to make his image even more perfect. emphasizing his merits. They were caught in this position by Sister Rinzel, who opened the door and stopped mid-sentence, her gaze frozen and her feelings mixed. She did not know how to react to the fact that she had caught such an intimate scene. Embarrassed, the lady walked away and awkwardly asked if she should have come back later when the young couple had finished, her voice trembling with embarrassment, as she had not expected her intervention to be so awkward. Reich introduced herself politely to the royals, smiling and curtsying. Her movements were refined, as if she was part of this world, where every word and gesture had meaning, and her manners could not fail to impress. Laughing, the aristocrat told the man that her sister often talked about him, which confused Rinzel. Her words sounded like a light joke, but for the lady they became an unexpected blow, because she did not expect that this would become a topic of conversation. The lady herself quickly changed the subject and, hugging Reich to herself, asked if they were similar. After all, they were twins. Her voice was soft, as if she was looking for a way to distract attention from her own experiences hidden behind her external confidence. All read, the maiden told her sister that the prince had replied that she was more beautiful. Her words were full of awkwardness, for she felt that it was a compliment, but at the same time, some embarrassment that could not be hidden. Hernan stood quietly, listening to the story of the two ladies in silence. His face did not reveal any emotion. He was like an observer, absorbed in what was happening around him. But in his eyes there was something hidden that no one could understand. The shelves of the mansion were filled with many expensive things: books, frames, vases. Every detail was created with love for art and aesthetics, and the atmosphere around was filled with calm luxury, as if time slowed down here. Luxurious furniture, sofas, soft pillows, and hangers. Everything around was furnished with refined taste, creating an atmosphere of coziness and nobility, where every detail seemed to tell its own story of luxury and sophistication. Shifting his gaze, Hernan suddenly said that, worried about the health of his beloved, he decided not to waste time. His words were confident, but there was some anxiety in them, as if he was eager to act, not wanting to postpone important decisions. The sisters, meanwhile, walked forward, their long dresses flowing along the floor like two streams, merging into a single image of grace, their every step filled with elegance, reflecting not only their belonging to high society, but also the strength of their connection. Rinzel asked, embarrassed, if the groom had rented all the rooms for their meeting, her voice trembling slightly, as she was surprised by such a gesture and did not know how to properly react to such an unexpected, but in its own way significant compliment. From the new compliment, Hernan blushed. His face became bright scarlet, and his bride, feeling awkward, decided to sit down next to him on the soft sofa. Her presence next to him added confidence, although there was hidden anxiety, which was felt in her gaze. Reich, playing the matchmaker, said loudly that she had specially made room for the second prince. Her words sounded with slight sarcasm, and it seemed that she was enjoying this moment, because everything that was happening looked like a game in which she was the main director. And so Hernan calmly sat down next to his future wife, his confidence not leaving him even at such a moment. And opposite them sat Rinzel's sister, her gaze focused, as if she was following every movement, observing what was happening. Suddenly, the beauty asked the heir to the throne where his brother Ishur was. Her voice was full of curiosity, and a slight mystery played on her face, as if she wanted to know something more that she had not dared to ask before. The guy frowned and replied that he and his family weren't close enough to travel together on the same transport. His words sounded cold, and perhaps he was trying to hide his dissatisfaction with the situation by avoiding being too open. Suddenly, another man was hurrying towards the building where the windows were decorated with flowers. His steps were quick and confident, as if he knew where he was going, and his presence suddenly added another mystery to this atmosphere that was already filled with tension. Ishar burst in, breathing heavily and irritated. His fists clenched in anger, his face contorted with rage, and every step he took sounded like a harbinger of a storm, as if he couldn't hold in the pent-up irritation any longer. The man, with a furious accusation in his eyes, pointed his finger at his brother, shouting at him that he had shamelessly stolen his clothes, leaving no doubt that it was his things that had been taken without permission. Hernan, raising his eyebrows in surprise, replied with slight surprise in his voice that the one who put on the clothes first had the right to consider them his own, assuring that the claims on the part of his brother were absolutely unfounded and had no logic behind them. Ishar, who had been watching this whole squabble, wanted to intervene and say something at first, but, stunned by what was happening, he fell silent, unable to utter a word, and his face remained calm, as if he had long been accustomed to such unexpected situations. For the prince, the first insult he heard from those around him was a real blow, because the words about how ugly and ridiculously he dressed pierced his soul, leaving a painful feeling of shame and resentment from such unfair criticism. The boys, unable to contain their emotions and indignation, began to swear and argue with each other with such force that each of them desperately tried to prove his case, becoming more and more heated and stubborn with each passing minute in their desire to win the conflict. The girls watched the guys with obvious interest and attention. Their glances could not hide their curiosity because they carefully followed every movement and reaction of the representatives of the stronger sex, trying to understand their thoughts and intentions. At that moment, Rinzel couldn't help but notice how her sister, hiding her feelings, watched her lover with slight excitement, secretly watching his every step and gesture, as if trying to understand his hidden emotions. The aristocrat turned sharply when a relative suggested showing the guys what real friendly sisters looked like, to which the lady replied with a slight smile that it would be better to leave this offer for another occasion, since they were clearly not ready for demonstrations. Pointing her finger at herself, Rinzel, in a quiet but insistent voice, asked her relative to trust her, assuring her that she knew exactly what to do in this situation and that her actions would be the most correct at this moment. Ishar, seeing the bruise on the girl's face, understood the situation completely wrong, making hasty conclusions, but now he has an opportunity to correct his mistake and sort out what happened, without missing the chance to find the right approach. The novel mentioned that the boy was the half-brother of the monster who led the empire, and this connection, despite its unusualness, determined his fate in a cruel world full of political intrigue and dangerous ambitions. Having lost his mother at a very young age, he met his younger brother, who became an emperor, as well as his uncle, who played an important role in the boy's life, but only seemed like a supportive and caring relative on the surface. The uncle, despite his authority and title, only pretended to be responsible for the boy's education, helped him with something, but in reality, everything was far from the truth. He never showed real care and attention to his nephew. Often, the first prince, so vulnerable and submissive, was thrown to the floor, mocked and cruelly laughed at, ridiculing his weaknesses and vulnerabilities, making him feel insignificant and helpless in this world. The uncle pointed his finger at his nephew and sternly ordered him to be better, to try harder, and not to disappoint his elders, as if his words could be a magic wand that would make the boy become strong and worthy. Little Ishar, deprived of strength and the ability to defend himself, could not answer his uncle and was subjected to violence, feeling more and more every day how his childish soul was collapsing under the yoke of cruel laws alien to him. The boy often had bruises left from strong grips and cruel blows, which was a consequence of the constant humiliation and violence to which he was subjected by an evil relative, who did not consider it necessary to hide his aggression. This evil relative, with mockery and caustic comments, mocked the boy and his parents, claiming that he could only be adopted, thereby further undermining the child's self-esteem and confidence. Soon, broken and exhausted by this constant stress and violence, Ishar withdrew into himself, completely despairing and hiding his experiences from those around him, as if hoping that his silence and isolation could protect him from the pain. The worried empress, noticing his behavior, asked the boy why he was afraid to bathe and why he refused to do so, not understanding what was hidden behind his alienation and constant fear. It was at this moment that the woman first noticed the bruises that had appeared on the young man's body, and only then did she realize that what was happening to him was far from ordinary childish pranks, and that hidden pain and violence had already become a part of his life. Ultimately, the uncle was sentenced to death for his crimes and cruel acts that had long remained hidden from the public eye. The cruel treatment of the nephew finally received the punishment he deserved, and the world was freed from this evil. The adults began to behave much more gently with the boy, offering him to go shopping and find himself new clothes, giving him a chance to feel that he was important and that his life would now be different, gentle, and caring. They became Ishar's hope for a better future, but also his shackles when, holding their hands during walks, he felt afraid that he would not be able to live up to their expectations and would not be worthy of their care. Isher was very afraid that adults would be disappointed in him if they found out about his past, which was filled with pain and suffering. He hid his experiences, trying to keep everything inside so as not to destroy that small spark of hope that they gave him. Lying alone in his bed at night, he couldn't stop the tears from rolling down his cheeks and felt sad about how hard it was for him to let go of the past and learn to trust the people who seemed to truly care about him. The lady, watching his behavior, thoughtfully realized that this was why Ishar cared for her so much and felt sympathy for her. He felt that they were both united by similar pain and a difficult past that left deep marks on their souls. The loud and decisive voice of the girl made the boys instantly freeze. Their argument stopped, and the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed, as if everything around them stopped for a moment, unable to withstand the tension they were creating. Hernan, realizing that all had been said, stepped aside, quietly letting go of his brother's collar, his face calm and his actions more deliberate, as if he realized it was time to leave the confrontation behind. Raike, comfortably seated on the sofa, with a kind smile, invited the first prince to sit down next to her and rest, as if wanting to give him a moment of peace and comfort in this tense moment, where each of those present was full of their own thoughts and emotions. With a slight smile on her lips, the noblewoman, out of habit, noted that they had not seen each other for a long time, adding a slight note of nostalgia to her words, as if trying to bring back to this moment the warmth and friendliness that they could share before. There was an awkwardness between the young couple that no one dared to dispel right away. The tension was noticeable to everyone, and Rinzel, observing the situation, realized that both were silent, as if something was preventing them from communicating calmly, creating an even greater distance between them. Leaning over, the girl realized that she should have changed her reaction and handled the moment differently, so she asked those present for a moment of attention, hoping that their perception of the situation would change and she would be able to find the right words. Rinzel bared her arm and showed the bruise that appeared on her body a week ago, thereby drawing the attention of those around her to what happened to her, as if revealing her vulnerability to them in the hopes of understanding. The people, surprised and a little stunned, stood motionless, learning that the lady had accidentally injured herself by tripping, and now this incident was in plain sight, which gave rise to questions in them, but at the same time sympathy for her undeserved pain. Rinzel, pointing to the bruise, confidently confirmed that it was the result of a blow received in the bathtub while bathing the day before yesterday, emphasizing that the incident was nothing out of the ordinary, but merely a random incident that had thrown her into confusion. Kneeling down, the Empress looked anxiously at the boy, wanting to make sure of his condition, but he only sat silently, hiding all his feelings and experiences within himself, not wanting to show either weakness or pain, even if it became obvious to others. Looking down, the maiden firmly and decisively asked the first prince not to weave his past into their conversation, making it clear that her words were more important than any memories, and that the present required more attention than any shadows of the past. The man, hearing her words, froze, his eyes widening in surprise, but keeping a calm expression on his face, as if he did not know how to react to her directness, and found himself in a difficult position, trying to understand what was happening. Turning to his brother, Ishar began to say that he was being slandered, desperately trying to justify his actions, but his words sounded weak and unconvincing, as if he himself did not believe what he was trying to say. But Hernan interrupted him in a sharp tone, telling him not to upset him further by expressing his discontent and dissatisfaction with what was happening, as if each new answer he gave were a heavy burden for him. Rinzel then went on to say that she and her sister were able to sleep in the same bed, hug, share their hard times, and despite all the hardships, always remain a family, showing the strength of their bond and trust in each other. Reich, adding with a slight sense of confidence, noted that they could really talk about anything without embarrassment or barriers, and shared their experiences, opening their souls to each other, like the only family capable of understanding and supporting. Ishar bowed his head slightly with a smile, admitting that he finally understood his mistake, as if the easy realization had become a revelation for him, and he felt how important this moment of self-knowledge had been, which had become a turning point for him. The boy, deep in thought, crossing his legs, really thought that Rinzel had been abused by her family, because he saw in her behavior some hidden pain that was hard to hide, and this gave him a sense of the tragedy of her past. Turning her gaze to her future husband, the maiden immediately realized that he had strangely opened his arms, as if expecting an embrace. His gaze was full of feeling that was difficult to ignore, as if he was looking for not only understanding in this gesture, but also closeness. The noblewoman quickly realized that in this way, he was asking her to give him affection and hugs. His look said more than words, and she felt how his desire to be close to her filled the space between them, creating an atmosphere of vulnerability and need for support. Without thinking twice, the beauty pressed herself against the guy, tenderly giving him care and love. Her embrace was full of warmth, and her actions spoke more than words, creating a moment when they both could feel the closeness and support they were looking for in each other. Then suddenly, Isha reminded him that Hernan had something important to tell him about the theft of the clothes, and there was a note of urgency in his voice, as if the moment was critical to understanding what was happening. The second prince smiled reservedly and explained that it was natural that he copied his brother, as he was indeed a great dresser, and he had always admired his style. But now that the situation required clarification, feeling proud of himself, the aristocrat proudly lifted his nose, as if his confession was not just an excuse, but a confirmation of his taste and ability to understand fashion, giving his brother permission to take from him the outfits that he himself considered a model of style. The city lived its measured life. Houses built from small wooden structures stood among green nature, creating an atmosphere of comfort where every resident could find their place, and everyday worries did not interfere with enjoying the beauty. Suddenly, Ishar stood up from his seat and explained that it was time for him to return to the palace on business. His voice was decisive and confident, as if he understood that this moment was important and he could not afford to postpone his obligations. Rake looked at her sister with concern and asked if she would return with the second prince. Her eyes were filled with worry, as she was not sure that their path would be easy, and her concern for her loved ones did not allow her to completely relax. The lady explained that she could not go with them, as she wanted to find a drugstore to buy pills for her wife. Her words sounded with care and attention, as if this was more important to her than any other errand. Hugging her relative, Rinzel firmly stated to the first heir to the throne that Reich was an ideal and good girl, her words full of confidence and support, as if she wanted to convince everyone around her of her sister's merits. The door slammed shut, and the city returned to its daily life. The houses standing in the shadows once again became part of this calm rhythm, and the world around continued to exist in its usual harmony. The hand left the cup on the table, carefully placing it on the porcelain surface, creating a light, almost imperceptible sound that seemed part of the silence enveloping the room at that moment. Hernan suddenly thanked his companion for the first time in his life. He had such a good conversation with his brother. His words sounded sincere, as if this conversation was a long-awaited moment that he did not realize until he experienced it. As children, they were very close and often played, laughed, and shared their secrets together. But as time went on and they grew older, they began to realize that their paths were diverging. Their relationship was changing, like everything around them, and this was inevitable. Bowing his head, the man quietly muttered that after the war began, everything changed, and he and his brother grew apart, his voice full of regret and bitterness, as if he himself could not understand what caused their breakup. In the novel, the brothers fell in love with the same girl, and this became a turning point in their lives, turning them into rivals whose feelings became a conflict, and each of them began to fight for her heart, not realizing how this would change their relationship forever. With a smile, Hernan admitted that it had been fun to quarrel over such a trifle as clothes with him. He laughed, remembering these trivial quarrels, but now it seemed funny to him, and even a little touching. Taking a sip of tea, the girl felt content, satisfied with her decision to marry the prince. Her eyes were full of calm confidence, and she felt that she had made the right choice, which became an important milestone in her life. Having put the cup on the table, the lady asked curiously if the man had prepared the same gift for her as for himself. Her voice was soft and quiet, and she waited for his answer with hope. Her gaze reflected sincere expectation. Receiving a kiss on the cheek, Rinzel smiled happily, her eyes filled with light, and such a gentle and touching smile appeared on her lips that the happiness was obvious to everyone nearby. The boy coughed into his fist in embarrassment and asked if it was a good gift, his words sounding uncertain, as if he himself was doubting his idea. And his gaze was full of worry because he genuinely wanted to please. The lady covered her mouth with her hand, but suddenly felt unwell, as if the air had become heavy and she could not breathe. Her face turned pale, and her breathing became rapid and intermittent, which caused alarm to everyone around her. The monster of the empire quickly noticed that something was wrong with the bride. His instincts immediately kicked in, and without further ado, he paid attention to her condition. The man's gaze became focused, and the anxiety in his eyes intensified. The girl pressed her hand to her chest and began to choke, breathing heavily, her chest heaving with difficulty, and panic appeared on her face, as if she could not breathe enough air and she had nothing to breathe with. The man's hand reached out towards her, trying to help her come to her senses. Her weak, labored breathing could not help but make him nervous, and without thinking, he immediately instinctively tried to support her. Hernan hugged the lady tenderly and told her that everything was all right. His voice was calm, but his eyes were worried. The lady's face was tired, sickly pale, as if she had been through a hard struggle with herself and with the air. Thanks to the guy's words, the beauty was finally able to take a deep breath and began to breathe again. Her breathing became even, and her body relaxed. She felt her strength gradually returning, and her gaze became clear again. Together, they sat in the room on the sofa in silence, surrounded by expensive red furniture, soft fabrics, and stylish interior, created an atmosphere of coziness. But this silence was still broken by the anxiety and tension that they both felt. There was a cupboard with porcelain dishes in the corner, and next to it, there was a cabinet on which books and several decorative items were neatly placed. Everything was in its place, but something in the air disturbed the harmony of this space. Hernan assumed that he was to blame, since he had touched Rinzel, and that was why she felt ill. His hand tightened with grief, and his gaze became heavier, as if he felt responsible for her condition and was having a hard time getting rid of the feeling of guilt. But the noblewoman hastened to dissuade her companion, assuring him that it was not his fault, and that, on the contrary, she really liked his hands. Her voice was soft and sincere. She tried to calm him down so that he would not be tormented by anxiety. Turning away, the maiden sullenly thought about why she suddenly felt ill. It was obvious that she needed to get to the palace vault as soon as possible. Her thoughts were racing, trying to figure out the reasons for her illness, and she felt that something was wrong. The woman's hand, from nerves, clenched into a fist. Her fingers seemed to instinctively clench, and she felt the tension growing. She tried to control herself, but there was a heavy load in her chest that would not let go. The aristocrat suddenly told her future husband that she wanted to arrange the wedding as soon as possible. The words were firm and decisive. She could not wait any longer, and the desire to find stability and peace in this world began to dominate her thoughts. To which Hernan, with a smile, agreed to do whatever his beloved wanted. His face lit up with a smile, and he readily accepted her decision, knowing that for her, he would do anything to make her happy and content. The city was large, and the buildings stood tall, creating a noisy and stormy background, and the doctor's loud voice in the office asked what the patient was sick with, to which he answered with genuine seriousness. The lady firmly answered her future husband that she was fine, and she complimented him by noticing how handsome he was. Her words were sincere, but there was a slight playfulness in her voice, as if she wanted to lighten the mood. Rinzel placed her hand on her chest and confidently declared that her face was a panacea for all ills. Her gaze determined as if there was more to this statement than just words. It was a symbol of her inner strength. The guy burst out laughing, and then asked with interest, Where exactly the lady learned such words? His voice was full of admiration. He couldn't help but appreciate her ability to keep up a conversation and make him smile even in such a situation. A memory of Rinzel gasping for breath flashed through his mind, and the man was genuinely worried about her health. His caring gaze and concern for her suddenly became clearer to him than ever. He realized that his feelings for her were deeper. Together, they went for a walk around the city, enjoying the warm, sunny day. And on the way, deciding to make a short stop, they went to a medicinal shop where you could always find rare and useful herbs. As soon as they entered, Rinzel immediately noticed her sister, who seemed to be completely engrossed in conversation with a young man with blonde hair. The young man standing next to her sister was truly handsome, with eyes like golden gems and a sweet, charming smile that could win the heart of any woman, which certainly did not go unnoticed. In the novel, it was precisely because of this guy's light flirting with other women that the couple's relationship began to cool, and this soon became the reason for their separation, which left a mark on the souls of each of them. Sir, this handsome man actually turned out to be mean and a little dissolute, which soon became obvious to everyone, but his charm and manners continued to hide his true nature. The lady, interested, watched her sister's interaction with this other man with slight concern, because she did not like how easily he won her attention and the extent to which her sister was absorbed in his speech. Hernan slightly inclined his head towards the bride and, looking at her with interest, asked if she knew the man with the blonde hair with whom her sister had been talking so animatedly in the shop, and what their relationship had been. Reich looked amazingly healthy and full of energy. Her face was shining with happiness, and there was not a shadow of illness on it, which contrasted with the fatigue that the lady herself felt. Rinzel herself found it incredibly difficult to take even a few steps. Her body seemed to refuse to obey, and the weight of illness and fatigue pressed on her, making her feel even more vulnerable. The beauty involuntarily stared at her hand, feeling a strange, painful feeling of envy that permeated her soul, because her sister looked so healthy and full of energy, while she herself was consumed by weakness and fatigue. The maiden, as if she had survived a serious illness, seemed completely exhausted and changed, as if she had exchanged places with her sister, and now her look was full of longing and anxiety, as if she could no longer return to her previous state. Hernan, with a worried look, turned to his bride, noting how much she had changed. Her face had become terribly pale, and her eyes were frozen in panic, as if she was experiencing some terrible nightmare that she could not understand. The woman moved with difficulty, moving her mangled hand away from his, desperately trying to get the guy to hurry so that they could get to the medicine store, because her condition required immediate intervention. With a cold mask of a smile plastered on her face, Rinzel walked forward with confident grace, leaving behind the surprised and confused boy who couldn't understand what was hidden behind her outward confidence. On the shelves of the shop were many bottles with various medicines, each of which was carefully labeled, creating some order in this strange world where each bottle promised healing or relief from pain. The herbs, neatly stacked next to the suitcase on the table, served as an important ingredient in the creation of pills that were used for medicinal purposes, turning simple plants into miracle cures for many ailments. Entering inside, Rinzel began to carefully examine the pharmacy, where the local resident was the village healer himself, and her gaze involuntarily slid over the shelves covered with various potions and herbs, creating a feeling of calm confidence. Looking at one of the bottles, the maiden quietly said that she would be curious to know what effect these potions had, as if she was looking for something that could help her in her internal struggle. The man with the thick beard who ran the shop calmly replied that the potion was meant to restore energy, which could be useful to those who had endured long days of fatigue or physical exhaustion. The lady froze in surprise when she heard the pharmacist's words, because despite the fact that she was here for the first time, it seemed to her that she had already been in this place, and this strange feeling made her fragile heart freeze. The apothecary explained that some time ago a girl came here who looked very similar to Rinzel, and she often visited this shop, as if she had her own secret intentions and searches here. The lady stood frozen in thought, puzzled by the strange coincidence, and the second prince, standing next to her, silently watched her, feeling how the atmosphere around her began to fill with unspoken questions and uncertainty. Having come to her senses, Rinzel quickly put on an artificial smile and, succumbing to the moment, agreed with the healer, lying that everything was fine, and asked him not to tell anyone about her visit here with the handsome guy, pretending that nothing unusual had happened. The man's hand rested on the noblewoman's head in a gesture that could be interpreted as supportive, but his gaze remained cool and penetrating, as if he understood everything perfectly. Trying to justify her sister, Rinzel confidently stated that Reich probably came here too, since she might have been feeling unwell, and her visit was entirely justified by concerns about her health. Hernan himself was not so sure of Reich's innocence, and, with a slight doubt in his voice, suggested that she might not have had such pure intentions as he would like to think, because everything was not as clear-cut as it seemed at first glance. The man, coldly and with obvious disbelief, asked how Rinzel could be sure that her sister was not lying to her, since Reich's words could be perceived as part of a more complex and hidden game that Rinzel might not have realized she was involved in. In the novel, Reich was portrayed as a good person with a pure soul, but the first drops of doubt began to appear in Rinzel's soul, because perhaps her relative was not as innocent as she was used to thinking. A skillful hand gently brushed a strand of hair from the bride's face, and the monster of the empire, holding back his feelings, explained that he had in no way tried to humiliate Reich. But sometimes doubt can be dangerous and deceptive, especially when it seems that everything is obvious. Bottles of medicine stood on the shelf, neatly arranged and ready for use, each remedy a promise of relief that might help in a difficult moment. Hernan compared the current situation with his beloved's twin to a war where enemies can hide, and sincerely wanted to give his wife faith and hope, because in his world, full of secrets, it is important not to lose trust and optimism. In return, the war monster offered his bride to trust him, promising that he would be there despite all obstacles and that his intentions were as pure as his love. The noblewoman, feeling inner confidence, smiled and gave her consent, allowing herself to believe in his words and in their common path. Their hands lightly touched each other, and in that fleeting touch, the fingers of a woman and a man, like two opposite worlds, found each other, creating a moment that was full of silent promises and expectations. With her other hand pressed to her mouth, Rinzel began to joke with a light laugh, saying that it was as if the guy was proposing to her right now, making the atmosphere less tense and more playful. Hernan, with his brows drawn together awkwardly and a little embarrassed, explained excitedly that he might be less experienced than his brother, but was prepared to make every effort to please his future wife, despite his indecisiveness. Suddenly, the beauty frowned, and looking sternly at the groom, scolded him, saying that he should not have imitated his relative so often, because he should have found his own path and not followed other people's examples. The lady hugged the aristocrat tenderly, gently explaining that he needed to remain himself, without trying to be someone else, because this was the only way to build a truly strong relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. The papers lay on the table, documents containing important information, waiting in the wings to be signed and approved as an integral part of their future path. Isher sat at his desk, complaining about the amount of work that seemed to never end, his thoughts preoccupied with how he was unable to cope with the ever-increasing flow of work. It turned out that Rinzel had set up this meeting and shown the bruises just to prove that the Crown Prince had misunderstood everything completely, playing with his perception and making him doubt his thoughts. The man began to shake his head from side to side, as if trying to drive away all these thoughts, thinking about how sweet and mysterious this beauty was, who knew how to leave an indelible impression without saying a word. The lady's behavior was strange, her smile was mysterious and light, and she seemed to know what would happen next, as if she had already experienced this meeting before and was playing this game ahead of time. Ishar also didn't understand why the girl, who had always greeted him before, suddenly started acting as if she was seeing him for the first time at a meeting, making him feel like a stranger in her presence. Now Lady Reich seemed intrigued and perhaps even in love with the heir to the throne. Her gaze was full of interest and hidden passion, and Ishar could not help but notice how her behavior changed. Could something so unusual have happened during this time that the twins seemed to have switched places, and now their characters and behavior seemed completely opposite, creating a strange feeling of uncertainty? Putting her hand on her heart, Rinzal suddenly said that she would like to get married to her husband in the near future, making this confession with such sincerity that Hernan could not help but sense her deep feelings. The castle at night, immersed in silence, sometimes reflected the light from the windows, and the stars in the sky seemed bright, as if in this silent night they were watching the events that were unfolding within its walls. The emperor was surprised by this decision and how quickly they rushed to get married, because in his eyes, it seemed like a hasty step that required a lot of thought and a considered approach. Hernan did not understand why his father reacted so harshly, and therefore firmly stated that Rinzal loved him not only for his cute and handsome appearance, but also for his inner strength, which confirmed his desire to be with her. The boy's parents froze in horror and fear at his words, not expecting such a turn of events, while Ishar continued to eat calmly, not paying attention to the tense atmosphere, as if nothing unusual was happening. Confused, Hernan asked what he had said that had made everyone around him freeze, whether his words had really caused such a stir, and he could not understand what exactly had caused such a sudden change in the family's reaction. The contented man placed the cutlery on the table. Turning to his family, he spoke about the wedding, and now all that remained was to do other preparations, tell his friends about it, and discuss how this important event would take place. The men from the night squad, who were in another room, froze in surprise when they learned that the monster of the empire had gotten married, and they double-checked their words, not sure if they had misheard, since it seemed incredible. Blushing with embarrassment, Hernan confirmed that he was getting married soon, trying to hide his awkwardness, but not knowing how to properly present this news so as not to cause even more surprise. The knights began to look at each other, and only after some time did the meaning of their brother-in-arms words reach them, because they did not immediately realize the seriousness of what was happening. But soon, shock and fear appeared on their faces, as they realized that this was not just a joke, and the situation had actually taken a turn that they did not expect and could not predict. Hernan himself began to think about the fact that the swordsman would have to find a good form for the event and prepare everything necessary for this important event, thinking about the details of the upcoming wedding and the needs that might arise. Suddenly, a hand was raised up, and this violent movement attracted the attention of everyone present, as if signaling that an important conversation was beginning that required immediate attention. The boys, one after another, began to express their concerns, saying that the lady bride might harm and defame the second prince, fearing that her intentions might not be as pure as they seemed at first glance. However, Hernan, with complete calm, clearly stated that Rinzal was a good woman and had no reason to use him for her own purposes, assuring everyone that her feelings for him were sincere. The monster of the empire froze when rumors began to spread that the duke's daughter was allegedly weaving political machinations, trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage, causing alarm among those who knew her. When the young man tried to say something to the captain, his partners immediately shut him up, putting their hands on his shoulders to prevent him from speaking, realizing that in this situation it was better to remain silent and not cause unnecessary problems. Bowing his head respectfully, the man explained that the other noblewomen were afraid of the second prince and did not want to marry him, which gave rise to doubts and mistrust arising from his reputation and the rumors surrounding his person. The captain himself was only interested in fighting and swords, and he was far from the most polite and friendly with the ladies, preferring to avoid unnecessary conversations and not wasting time on such worldly matters as weddings and relationships. Turning to his old friend, Hernan asked if he had also considered him cruel and unfriendly to the ladies, trying to understand to what extent his reputation among the knights was really as he perceived it. Putting his hand on his heart, the assistant smiled tightly and said that the war monster was a kind and good man, confirming that his cruelty was perhaps just an external mask, hiding good intentions. Taking a closer look at his friend, Hernan gave his verdict that he seemed to agree with many other knights who considered him kind and noble, despite his cruel reputation. Preparations for the wedding soon began. The house was large and beautiful, surrounded by nature, creating an atmosphere of coziness and tranquility, suitable for such an important event. The fathers of the soon-to-be married children got to know each other, discussing details of the upcoming wedding and plans for the future, establishing relationships that could strengthen their unions. The noblewoman carefully chose every detail for the wedding, carefully considering every element of the decor and preparation so that everything would be perfect, because this was one of the most important events in her life, and she wanted it to go perfectly. There was no free day for rest, and from fatigue, Rinzel could hardly stand on her feet. Her strength was running out, but she had no rest until she had completed all the work. In this, she was helped by her faithful maid, supporting her in difficult moments. Grabbing the door handle, Rinzel suddenly realized that her marriage would take place tomorrow, and this thought shocked her. Time flew by too quickly, and she did not have time to prepare for such an important step. The twins discussed how this was their last night together, spending it together like old times, thinking and reminiscing, knowing that their lives would soon change forever. Hugging her sister, the girl said that it would be good if she married the first heir to the throne, and they would live together in the palace, imagining how their future could be bright and full of luxury. The girl couldn't help but notice that the residence became noticeably more crowded when the news of the upcoming marriage between the duke's daughter and the emperor's son became known, and everyone looked excited and interested in the event. With a forced smile, Rinzel muttered that everyone around her looked happy and content, while she herself felt like an outsider among all those happy faces, as if her own happiness was somewhere far away. The twins' hand touched hers, and Reich asked with genuine excitement if her sister felt happiness from this important moment, hoping that she too could share the joy, despite all her doubts. Looking down, Rinzel admitted that she was happy for her sister, but a little envious of her health and the ease with which she dealt with all the difficulties, while she herself felt increasingly weak. People could do anything, seem full of energy and health, living an ordinary life, but the maiden herself could barely take a couple of steps, feeling how her strength was running out, and how difficult it was to do the simplest things. Finally, the beauty added that she thought she would soon die at this rate, feeling her strength fading with each passing day, and hoping that her torment would soon end. But at the same time, she could not get rid of the feeling of inevitability. But then Reich stopped her, loudly and decisively, declaring that Rinzel could not disappear so easily and leave this world, because her presence was too important for everyone who loved and appreciated her. The aristocrat hugged her soulmate and promised that she would remember her forever, despite any trials and distances, because their connection was too deep to be destroyed by time or circumstances. For a long time, the beauty did not see her future husband, and they communicated only through letters, which seemed to her the only way to maintain contact, although she suffered from the lack of personal meetings and real communication. And so, finally, the wedding day arrived, and the bride ran to her husband in a white dress. His luminous image seemed to her like a light in a dark world in which she was still trying to find her place. Rinzel looked incredibly beautiful in her white wedding dress, with great sophistication and embellishments that highlighted her beauty and grandeur, as if nature itself had prepared her for this important moment. Hernan smiled widely, telling his wife that she was simply charming today, as if glowing with happiness, and he could not help but notice her incredible beauty, which made his heart beat faster. With a joyful expression on her face, the aristocrat suddenly asked out of the blue if something bad had happened to the Empire's monster, as if she could sense his feelings, knowing him better than anyone. The man was shocked by how quickly his wife figured out his mood, understanding him at first glance, and realizing how much he was shaken, because she always accurately guessed what was going on in his soul. Standing in front of her, Hernan sighed sadly and said that nothing could be hidden from her, because she had always been like an open book to him, and her insight was both his strength and weakness. As the lady hugged her husband, she quickly realized that the guy was upset by the words of his knight friends, who told him that no lady would love him, and she felt how his confidence was undermined. Rinzel said that her husband should apologize to her, because such words could hurt his pride, to which Hernan himself responded that he knew about the rumors that were spreading about him, but did not think that they would go so far. He sadly admitted that he simply wanted to receive congratulations from loved ones, expecting warmth and joy on this important day. But everything did not go as he imagined, and now the feelings were mixed. The girl turned away from her husband, and then, with an intriguing expression on her face, explained that she had an idea on how to make her husband's dream come true, and she was sure that she could make him happy, despite everything. Turning back to the Empire monster with a playful smile, she asked him if he was willing to listen to her, because her plan could change the situation dramatically, and she was sure that she needed his support. The wedding hall was luxurious, decorated with white flowers and gold ribbons, and the priest stood at the altar, ready to say the most important words of their lives, while everything around was filled with anticipation and excitement. The Duke, the bride's father, cried with happiness as he sat next to his other daughter, who comforted him, realizing how much he was going through this important moment, because he was so proud of his daughter's wedding. The Emperor and Empress were also happy about this event. Their faces lit up with smiles, and in their eyes one could see sincere happiness for the future of the young couple, as a symbol of family well-being and a strong union. And only the order of the second prince sat emotionlessly, invited to the wedding, but doubting the honesty of the bride towards their captain, which forced them to remain wary and closely monitor the development of events. With stern glances, they closely followed the young couple, as if trying to decipher their every gesture, every word, as if evaluating their truthfulness, not believing in the sincerity of what was happening and anticipating possible mistakes. The lady, feeling her heart begin to beat faster with excitement, pressed her hand to her chest, reminding herself to breathe slowly and calmly to avoid anything that could worsen her health and cause severe weakness. A slight tremor ran through her entire body, caused by an internal turmoil that she could not get rid of. Everything around her seemed too intense, and her weak body could not cope with this stress, succumbing to anxiety. Suddenly, the lady froze, as if she was overcome by cold horror, realizing that she had worried in vain. After all, this body no longer belonged to her, and she lost control of herself, feeling how her internal experiences were reflected in her physical condition. The man's hand gently and confidently lay on her shoulder, as if giving her strength and calming her down, instilling in her a feeling of protection and confidence, as if the whole world had slowed down for a moment, and she could relax a little. The guy looked at Rinzel with obvious concern and asked if she was okay, because his concern was obvious. He couldn't help but notice how her facial expression changed, and this immediately made him wary. Overcoming her own emotions and trying to hide her anxiety, Rinzel smiled, trying to calm her husband, deceiving him with assurances that she was fine, despite the fact that inside she felt something completely different. The ceremony continued, and the bride and groom walked forward, heading towards the altar, where all eyes were on them, and each step seemed more and more important, and the atmosphere was filled with solemnity and anticipation. But suddenly, Rinzel stepped forward and loudly declared that she had some important words she wanted to say, breaking the silence of the room and causing everyone present to listen carefully to her words. Hernan, who had not yet had time to comprehend what was happening, was in complete shock from such an unexpected act of his beloved. He froze in surprise, not knowing what to think and how to react to her act, which seemed completely unpredictable. Coldly and sternly, with an impenetrable expression on her face, the noblewoman ordered everyone present to treat their marriage with respect, emphasizing that their relationship was sincere, despite all the rumors and discontent that surrounded them. The lady also recalled the sinister rumors that circulated about the great monster of the empire, a terrible and merciless creature, to whom the most terrible deeds were attributed. They said that this man was a monster, ruthless and bloodthirsty, that the man raised his sword, sowing death and destruction in his path, leaving nothing in his wake but fear and unbearable pain. Despite these frightening stories, Rinzel, feeling anxious and worried, gently and warmly hugged her husband by the shoulder, trying to support him and comfort him as best she could with her touch and care. After that, the girl added that in reality, Hernan was a little awkward, but at the same time, he always remained a good, kind, and gentle gentleman, whose heart radiated warmth and care, despite his small mistakes. The noblewoman laughed, praising the kindness of the second prince, his sincerity and generosity, which could not help but touch her soul, and in her eyes he became a true example of nobility and great humanity. Suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, her husband, affectionately addressing her by name, with tenderness and love penetrated into her personal space, awakening in her heart a wave of tender feelings and memories of old days. Hernan kissed his wife, gently hugging her to him by the waist, and there was something magical in this touch that made time stop, filling their hearts with mutual love and harmony. Their lips, as if not wanting to part, remained close, dissolving in a kiss that seemed endless, where every moment was saturated with passion and deep affection, making them forget about everything. And at that moment, Rinzel felt sick, as if she had suddenly lost her strength. Trembling took over her body, and pain spread throughout her body, causing a feeling of weakness and helplessness. She began to swallow heavily, her breathing became more and more intermittent, and with each breath it seemed that there was less and less air, and her condition worsened with each passing moment. The man hugged his wife, wrapping his arms around her, as if providing her with safety, care, and support, so that she could stand, feeling the support and strength in his arms, which helped her to come to her senses a little. Hernan quietly thanked his wife for her fortitude and patience, and then, loudly and confidently, announced to everyone present that they could now continue with the ceremony, despite the moment of excitement that had occurred. The knight was deeply surprised by such words and feelings that were addressed to him by the captain and his wife, despite the fact that he had previously not believed in such manifestations, considering them too naive and inapplicable in their cruel world. Ishar glanced at his brother, trying to decipher his impassive face, even when Hernan, with complete seriousness, stated that his goal was to make Rinzel the happiest girl on earth, despite possible obstacles. And after this, the heir to the throne raised his hand and, with slight irony, said that his brother's speeches were too sugary and sweet, which caused confusion in the duke's daughter, who did not know how to react to such frankness. In the end, the entire order of monsters of the empire was filled with feelings. They cried, rejoiced, worried together with the captain, sharing his happiness and pride for such an important moment that brought everyone the long-awaited harmony. The young couple finally went ahead with their wedding ceremony, surrounded by everyone who supported them, and despite all the trials, they felt that they had found in each other not only love, but also destiny, with which they would walk hand in hand. The hall was filled with a multitude of aristocrats who were actively discussing what was happening at the event, discussing the tables with exquisite dishes, admiring the music that filled the space, creating a festive atmosphere. Suddenly, Ishar, raising his hand up, turned to one of his brother's knights, as if trying to attract attention, deciding to share his thoughts with someone who could understand his feelings and intentions. With a smile on his face, the swordsman confessed to the prince that he would never have thought that the captain would be such a caring and attentive husband, capable of such warm and sincere feelings, which greatly surprised him. The men winced as they heard the words that they had previously treated Lady Rinzel with wariness and distrust, causing them to feel an internal discomfort and confusion, as if their own judgments were being questioned. However, this turned out to be a mistake, because Rinzel became the first lady to speak so warmly and sincerely about the Empire's monster, defending his honor and kindness, which earned her respect and recognition among all present. And so, at the ceremony, the knight clapped his hands tirelessly, trying to maintain the festive atmosphere, while Aishar stood to the side, completely calmly sipping wine, not sharing the general excitement and solemn mood. Unfortunately, rumors could not be avoided, and many representatives of the court actively discussed the marriage between the duke's daughter and the second heir to the throne, comparing it with other unions and trying to find something unusual or suspicious in it. However, the bride and groom took this gossip with defiance, not paying attention to other people's conversations, ready to stand up for their love, despite all the unkind rumors, which only strengthened their determination. One of the members of the order summed it up by expressing the opinion that the captain's wife was not only a wonderful person, but also a true embodiment of beauty, like a rare and beautiful flower that could delight anyone with its charm. Ishar, agreeing with this opinion, added that the bride's wedding dress really did look truly irresistible up close, which surprised the swordsman, who could not understand how such a simple dress, at first glance, could make such a strong impression. Suddenly, the prince started as soon as he heard that Marquis Miller had arrived, and his face instantly changed, as if this unexpected guest had caused in him a mixture of surprise and anxiety, filling the atmosphere of the hall with tension. The man with blue hair and a monocle, dressed in an elegant suit, politely greeted the emperor with a slight bow. His gaze was penetrating, and his manners were impeccable, which immediately attracted the attention of those present in the hall. The marquis, standing next to the majestic ruler, who sat quietly on his throne, warmly congratulated his son on his engagement, expressing sincere joy and admiration for this important event, which brought honor and prosperity to both parties. Miller was certainly a handsome man with aristocratic features. His smile was charming and his teeth were impeccable, which emphasized his sophistication and refinement. As soon as the Marquis noticed the first prince, his gaze became a little wary. It was strange how this head of the family had so quickly earned the trust of the emperor and his wife, without having a long journey and passed behind him. With respect, Miller also greeted the first heir to the throne, bowing his head in respect, understanding how important this acquaintance was for the future. Laughing, the aristocrat asked curiously if Ishar was saddened by the fact that his younger brother had married first, as if this should somehow affect his own feelings or position in the family. With an uncomprehending smile, the prince replied that he did not see the slightest reason for sadness, because each person chooses his own path, and such things should not cause despondency in someone who is determined and confident. The prince tensed up when he heard the words that Hernan, now closer to the throne, might be a more promising candidate, which immediately overshadowed his own ambitions and gave rise to some anxiety in his soul. With a cruel grin, the Marquis was obviously laughing at the eldest prince, his words sounding like mockery, which only emphasized his enjoyment of the confusion and internal conflict arising in Ishar. The heir's memory was filled with images of himself, standing at his sick mother's bedside and promising her that he would become emperor, and that promise became more than just words for him. He perceived it as an indisputable destiny that he was striving for. Ishar, pretending that the Marquis's insolent words had not affected him at all, asked in a reserved manner what business he had with what was happening, without showing the slightest weakness and confidently standing his ground, as if this whole situation had nothing to do with him. The wind blew the curtains, and through the windows a picturesque view of nature opened up: trees, greenery, and distant hills. And in the old mansion, there was silence and peace, disturbed only by the rustling of the wind and the barely audible creaking of doors. Sitting on the bed next to his tired wife, Hernan could not help but worry about her. His gaze was full of concern, and he promised her that the next morning they would definitely go to the doctor to find out what exactly was bothering her health. Placing his hand on his wife's face, he expressed his support and tenderness, trying to convey to her at least a little comfort and confidence that everything would be fine, despite the alarming symptoms that worried him so much. After this, the prince confessed that he was especially worried about the attacks when his beloved lost consciousness, which brought him unbearable anxiety, because he felt how her health became more fragile and unstable every day. Looking down, the girl cursed her weak body once again, feeling how it was failing her at the most inappropriate moment, not allowing her to be who she wanted to be. Turning away, the lady asked with some doubt whether her husband would feel calmer if she became healthy, hoping that her recovery would bring him peace and relieve him from unnecessary worries. Without thinking twice, Hernan agreed, sitting opposite his beautiful wife, his gaze full of care, and he was ready to support her in this desire, assuring her that he would do everything in his power. Suddenly, the noblewoman reminded her husband of his promise that he had given her earlier, filling her voice with determination, as if this moment had come, and she no longer intended to postpone what had long been promised. Excitedly, but with firmness in her voice, the lady said that she wanted him to fulfill it right now. She wanted to get into the palace vault, where, in her opinion, something important was hidden that could change their destinies. Hernan was struck by such an unexpected request, and, not believing his ears, asked again, not understanding how she could suggest something like that in her grave condition, when her health was so precarious and fragile. The point was that Rinzel was suffering from an incurable disease, and no herbs or medicines could ease her suffering. All attempts to find an effective remedy only confirmed the helplessness of existing treatments. Despite her efforts, she continued to drink tinctures, hoping for their miraculous effect, but none of them produced results, and her condition, alas, continued to worsen, and hope for recovery disappeared. The beauty, despite her efforts, continued to choke. Her health was considerably weakened, and every day became a test for her, as her body increasingly failed her in the most difficult moments. However, she was sure that there was important information hidden in the palace vault, something that could give her a spark of hope for a cure, something that could restore her strength and help her overcome this terrible disease. Staring at her husband, Rinzel asked with a trembling voice if he would help her in her torment, because she felt that her strength was running out, and she was ready to trust him, hoping for his support and care. Staring into the void, her gaze was full of despair, and Rinzel, with an expression of complete loss, quietly said that she wished she could live a long and happy life despite all her suffering. But unfortunately, her health was in question. One day, the girl suddenly became the heroine of her own story, like in some novel, and at that moment, she felt that she had a chance to return to her original world, where her life could be different, without pain and fear. However, while she was in the body of the book's heroine, Rinzel sincerely wanted to find a healthy body so as not to feel helpless, and at least for a while, to be free from those painful restrictions that fettered her in reality. The lady dreamed of spending time with the beautiful monster of the empire, enjoying his company and walking with him along the green alleys, trying to find at least a little peace and joy in this world full of fear and uncertainty. She also dreamed of having picnics and cozy get-togethers with her sister, enjoying easy conversation and quiet moments away from all the worries and pain, just being with the one she loved. The lady sincerely wanted to eat delicious food, enjoy the dishes, and then drink aromatic tea in the company of loved ones, not thinking about illnesses and fatigue, but only about the joy of every moment of life. And of course, she would like to quarrel with bad people, arrange small quarrels and conflicts, as often happens in life, living her life without restrictions in actions and experiences, with a sense of freedom and independence. Rinzel sincerely envied her sister, who was healthy and full of strength, unlike her, who was a prisoner of her illness, and every day became more and more difficult and unbearable for her. The woman's hand clenched into a fist on the blanket as she felt anger and envy fill her heart, and powerlessness and fear paralyze her body, preventing her from taking even a step away from her suffering. The lady could no longer contain her emotions, and feeling tears clouding her eyes, she could not hold back and burst into tears, burying her face in her husband's shoulder, as if seeking salvation in his arms from all the pain and despair that had accumulated in her heart. The young couple embraced in the privacy of their bedroom, where silence and comfort reigned, as if the whole world had frozen around them, giving them the opportunity to forget themselves in each other's arms for just a moment, to feel support and peace. 500 years ago, the one who stopped the wars, uniting the fragmented lands into one mighty empire, was a silver dragon, a creature that personified strength and wisdom, unrivaled in its valor. His name was Apophis, and he ruled with great wisdom, not using his power in vain, but directing it towards the prosperity and well-being of the peoples, striving for harmony between all races and cultures. He truly loved humanity, and by using the power of his position, through union and marriage, he was able to restore peace, ending the bloody wars and establishing the long-awaited peace that generations had dreamed of. The water, like a silver river, slowly flowed from the jug into the cup, creating a soft and melodic sound, as if nature itself was inviting one to rest in peace. The drops fell, creating a reflection of light, as if each drop was a small miracle. After serving his lady a drink, Hernan explained with a serious expression that entering the vault required special permission from the dragon, a creature whose power and authority extended far beyond ordinary laws. With a heavy sigh, the man added that if he had known the truth, he would have prepared the necessary documents and all the information in advance to avoid this unexpected obstacle, but now everything turned out to be not so simple. 500 years passed, and despite the passage of time, Apophis was still alive, retaining his power and influence, continuing to be a mystery that no one could fully unravel, and no one even knew how to deal with him in the current era. The emperor, the prince's father, had recently had the honor of meeting the dragon while visiting the vault, and the event left a deep impression, for the dragon was not just a myth, but a real creature with amazing powers. After this, Hernan added that in order to complete all the procedures, they would also have to obtain permission from all the nobles, since only the consent of each of them could guarantee peace and order in the empire. The family of the Wizard Duke was renowned for their amazing magic, passed down from generation to generation. Their magical arts were the subject of admiration and study by many who sought to master the secrets of this art. The red-haired Duke, on the other hand, was known for his skill in fencing. His technique and dexterity on the battlefield made him famous among the nobles and knights. Everyone knew him as a true master of the sword. But Marquis Miller was famous for his outstanding success in trade and accumulated wealth. His entrepreneurial savvy and abilities in the field of commerce made him one of the most influential people in the empire. Suddenly, unable to bear it any longer, the wife interrupted her husband, asking in surprise if she could not have obtained permission to enter the vault exclusively for herself, without the participation of others, since it was her own business. Hernan was extremely surprised by the lady's desire to go to such a dangerous place alone, without any escort, realizing that it could be too risky for her, but did not dare to contradict her decision. Rinzel, sweating profusely, stated that this was her personal problem, and that she herself had to decide what to do, despite all the dangers that might await her in that dark place that hid so many secrets. The prince stubbornly pressed his lips together and looked at his beloved with concern, feeling his heart squeeze with worry because he didn't want her to be in trouble, but he also understood her persistence. The man's face showed frustration and disappointment. He really wanted to help his lady, to protect her, but at the same time, he knew that he might not be able to convince her of this decision, which caused him even more pain. Immediately, realizing her mistake, the girl hugged her husband by the shoulder, as if apologizing, and quickly said that she would only be glad if he agreed to go with her, because without his support, she would feel lost in this dangerous business. After that, with a gentle smile on her face, the beauty added that from now on they were one family, and that all she needed was his help and support, because only in this way would they be able to overcome any difficulties that they encountered. With a blush on his cheeks, the prince approached the lady and, tenderly pressing her to himself, forgave her for her harsh words, rejoicing that he was finally able to be with her, despite all the difficulties that they still had to go through. The man, with determination in his voice, asked her to go with him to the banquet tomorrow, where he planned to ask permission from the other nobles in order to enter the vault, hoping that with her support it would be easier to achieve. Since the wedding was held only in the circle of the closest relatives, other nobles were invited to the banquet to share this solemn moment with important people of the empire, making the event even more significant. The girl grabbed her husband's strong hand tightly, ready to lean on him if she felt ill or insecure at such an important moment, because she knew that the responsibility lay on his shoulders. Suddenly, with slight embarrassment, Hernan admitted that he had never danced before, and if he was awkward or confused, he asked Rinzel not to be angry with him for his inexperience, because for him this moment was as important as for her. The aristocrat was embarrassed. Her cheeks instantly turned red with delight and joy when she heard her husband's words filled with admiration. There was such sincere pride in her and his voice that the girl's heart was filled with warmth and love. The two of them moved forward, merging with the atmosphere of the party, enjoying this exciting moment. Their steps were interrupted by a confident voice that, leaving no doubt, declared that Rinzel's dancing skills were not just good, they were excellent. The aristocrat, turning towards the source of the sound, was surprised to recognize in this voice a familiar and unique sound that was dear and deeply familiar to her. It was Reich, her sister, standing before them with a wide smile on her face, radiating confidence and nobility like a true aristocrat. She proudly adjusted her posture, as if simultaneously emphasizing her irresistible beauty and the connection with her sister. Without waiting for her sister to arrive, Rinzel, a little embarrassed but determined, said that she would not allow her husband to be disgraced, despite all the difficulties, and her words were full of confidence, because she was ready to support him in any situation. Pressing her hand to her chest, the lady sincerely hoped that her dancing skills would not fail, because this was her chance to show that she was capable of handling any difficulties, and she could not afford to make a mistake. Once again, unable to contain her excitement, the beauty stepped on her husband's foot, and this became another small but awkward moment that made her heart beat faster from shame. Hernan, who was leading his partner in the dance, with a smile, but also with a slight reproach, reminded that this was already the 10th time that she accidentally stepped on his foot, but he still continued to dance, enjoying the moment. With a smile, the prince responded to the apology by saying that the lady should calmly step on his feet, and he would continue to lead her in the dance, confidently and without hesitation, despite her awkwardness and uncertainty. Frowning, the lady asked in surprise if he was really making fun of her now, because she clearly didn't expect that, especially at such an important moment when all eyes were on them. The man's hand reached out to the woman's, and Hernan was worried that he might tire his companion, despite his love of dancing, anxiously watching her every movement and worrying whether she was having a hard time. The aristocrats could not help but cast interested glances at the monster of the empire and his now wife, quietly discussing among themselves that their union was an event that could hardly leave anyone indifferent, be it envy or admiration. Rinzel felt their gazes on her back, and she felt uneasy. An unpleasant discomfort arose inside her, as if all eyes were directed only at her, and she could not get rid of this feeling. In a rude, impassive tone, the prince suggested that he could make it so that they could never again look at anything without the slightest doubt or worry, for he was willing to do anything for their safety and peace. The words of the prince's assistant came to mind, who had once advised him to destroy his enemies without leaving a trace, since only in this way could he guarantee himself the peace and power that the world itself so urgently demanded. The man, with visible care and attention, helped his lady to sit down, and then, with a slight smile, suggested that everyone present was closely watching them, because they rarely appeared at such social events, which attracted attention to them. The handsome man himself remained standing, not rushing to reveal all the details of how he learned about the rumors associated with Rinzel, because, despite his stay in the war and all the trials he had experienced, he still remained a mystery to those around him. The heir to the throne, realizing that his behavior could have been inappropriate, apologized to everyone for his harshness and tactlessness, realizing that at such events one must be especially attentive and control oneself, to which Rinzel firmly stated that next time, if he was curious about something about her, he should just ask her directly, rather than digging for information secretly, hiding his true intentions behind a veil of questions. Suddenly, the young couple were interrupted by a man who entered the room, breaking their momentary calm and creating some anxiety in that moment when they were absorbed in each other and their thoughts. It was Ramon Sibaya, a young man, the son of a duke, with unusual eyes of different colors and long blonde hair, which gave his appearance a certain mystery that could not go unnoticed in such surroundings. Hernan, turning to his wife, addressed her with a smile, imagining who stood before them, and not hiding his respect for the young heir, understanding the importance of this acquaintance in their new, changed situation. The duke's son greeted the newlyweds with due respect and politeness, while the rest of the nobles could not hide their curiosity and attention directed at this moment, and their glances were full of different thoughts and assessments. The guy bowed respectfully, thereby expressing deep respect and reverence for the nobleman's daughter and the prince's wife, which was a sign of his good manners and understanding of the significance of the moment, because such gestures could not go unnoticed. Rinzel, however, glanced around the room and noticed the younger boy, the second son, who was unusually cute, with such an innocent expression on his face that she could not help but feel warmth and sympathy for him. Deciding not to drag out the conversation, Hernan immediately asked his interlocutor if it was possible to obtain his permission to enter the storage facility, realizing that time and circumstances required a quick decision and action from them. However, the young couple was disappointed when the guy firmly answered them that they should discuss such a question with his father, because the decision on this matter depends only on the older generation, and they, like many others, had to show patience. The door slammed shut with a rich sound that echoed throughout the room where the important event was taking place, filling the space with a sense of finality and slight tension, as if everything around had frozen for a moment. Suddenly, Rinzel noticed her husband, confidently and calmly, walking towards the lady's sister, who was standing nearby, absorbed in her thoughts, and she could not help but feel how this moment affected her mood and attention. After that, her gaze was drawn to the boy she had recently met. He was actively doing something. His movements were full of energy and determination, as if he was busy with an important matter that left no room for doubt. It turned out that because of his small stature, the boy could not reach the sweets on the table, and his gaze, full of disappointment, darted over the beautiful treats standing on a high tray, as if they were an unattainable dream. Turning her head to the side, the girl decided that she could not leave the little aristocrat without help, and with a smile headed towards him, ready to help get the treasured treats, because her heart was full of care for him. Suddenly, without warning, the plates with desserts began to suddenly burst into flames, their surface blazing with bright flames, which immediately attracted everyone's attention and caused panic among those present. Rinzel, without a second thought, rushed towards the boy to save him from possible injury, instinctively pushing him away from danger and trying to prevent the fire from harming him or those around him. The excited boy rushed to his savior, who lay before him with a bump on her head. His heart sank with anxiety, and he hurried to her, forgetting about everything, to help the future empress.